What is up, everybody? Derek Lambert here, host of MythVision. I got a bag of popcorn, and I hope you get your popcorn too, whether you're watching on your phone through the vertical or horizontal on the computer or TV or whatever. We're going to be reviewing, along with the Anglican autodidact himself, debated Bart Ehrman recently, and it was on the Resurrection. I actually have not watched it. The commercial that you saw in this video, we just took one moment. I went in, grabbed that one moment and said, I'm going to save the whole thing, popcorn in hand, watch the debate, at least watch, good portions of it. We're not going to be able to cover the whole thing. And without further ado, I want to introduce our guest. He's been on before, Jonathan Sheffield. Welcome back to MythVision.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Look, we're doing it.
Yeah, both have the X, the butter popcorn. But no, thanks again, Derek, for hosting me on your channel. Been a huge fan of your work and all your support. So thanks again for having me on.
For those who watch my intros and outros, Jonathan is the creative artist behind those works. He has made the intro, the Matrix outro. He customly built that by his own hand. And he's a good friend of mine. He just so happens to also be a Christian. And we're going to be listening to his debate opening. Hopefully we can get some of Bart Ehrman in there.
Yes.
Some people might want to hear. They want to hear what he has to say too, And I'm going to be frank with you. I'm going to just be like, if I think something's not, I'm already biased, clearly, in terms of I'm not convinced. You know what I mean? But I am going to try and think as comparative as I can to other arguments that Christians make and try to give you a little mercy while I'm listening along, because I'm going to try and give you a little bit of, a little bit of my skepticism here while I'm eating popcorn.
No, and I think it's good because you have hosted many of my debates. So I think from your initial perception of the Bart Ehrman, the comments, I mean, I have sat down on your channel with Dr. Mark Goodacre, Dr. Robyn Walsh, and a number of Kip Davis, Joshua Bowen. So you always know I bring a unique perspective to all the cases I bring.
Of course. And you've been doing this for a while now with MythVision. I've met you in person again. Let's not waste any time. Let's start reviewing if you're down.
Yes, I am down.
Especially while popcorn is still hot. You know what I mean?
Yes.
All right, here we go. So we're on your channel. Be sure to subscribe to the Anglican Autodidact, even if you don't agree with the guy. I mean, come on. He built our cartoon. I mean, you can't dismiss him over just the fact that he doesn't agree with you on the Gospels. But this is the one, right?
This is the one.
Okay. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Nope. All right. Have a nice day. I'm sorry, Jonathan. All right. I'm sorry, man. Let's just keep going. Hit the like on the video. Help Jonathan grow with this. I didn't want to go full screen. I wanted to be able to see your face while I'm doing this.
Yeah,
here.
Sure. No, we can have live reaction.
How come it keeps wanting me to go full? Trying to not let you have to see all the other stuff on the side. Oh, I won't be able to pay attention to the chat that way. I'm trying to get it to work. Let's see, theater mode. Let's try that. That's it. That'll work, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's start from the beginning. Are we starting from the very beginning and just let it ride, or what?
Yeah, I think you can pass the announcements. I think the first 5 minutes are announcements.
Got it. Did you timestamp this, by the way?
Yeah. No, I did not.
You need to. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, that's okay. You can do it later. You really do need to. Let's get it.
Okay.
Can you hear that?
I cannot hear that.
Okay. So I'm going to do this to make sure you can hear it, because I should have known better. There we go. Let's try that. There we go.
Sound good?
That's better.
All right. What's up, chat? Everybody, show some love.
In the works of the Greek biographer Plutarch and the Roman historian Livy, we find the story of the legendary founder and first king of Rome, Romulus. Allegedly, Romulus was convening an assembly outside the city when a sudden and violent thunderstorm erupted. The storm surrounded the king in such a dense cloud that he became completely invisible to the assembly. From that hour, Romulus was no longer seen on earth. As the storm ceased and the sun broke out, the crowd assembled only to find the throne deserted, prompting an inquiry about their king. The senators who had been standing close to Romulus did not allow the assembly to investigate or concern itself with the matter. Instead, they ordered them to honor and worship Romulus as a god, citing that a whirlwind had carried him up to heaven. After a few took the initiative, many declared Romulus a god, the son of a god, and father of Rome. However, some questioned the matter with a bitter and hostile spirit, accusing the senators of opposing a silly tale on the people and of being the murderers of the kings themselves. Thereafter, a patrician even asserted before the Roman Senate that he encountered the ascended Romulus, who descended from the sky and approached him, stating, "Go and inform the Romans that it is the will of heaven that my Rome shall be capital of the world." After uttering these words, Romulus departed upward. However, according to Cicero, Livy, and Plutarch, the account was fabricated by the patrician to exonerate the senators and to alleviate public mourning. Plutarch even likes this account to the Greek fables about Aristeas, a figure also recorded by Herodotus, who allegedly appeared after his death and made remarkable appearances. Accordingly, Aristeas entered a fuller's shop and died there. The fuller then closed his shop and informed his kinsmen. Word spread that Aristeas has died, but some travelers denied this, claiming that they had met him on his way to Croton that very same day. Meanwhile, the relatives of the deceased went into the fuller's shop. However, when the shop was open, Aristeas was not there, dead or alive. 7 years later, he allegedly appeared briefly before vanishing. The insights gained from these narratives brings me to my first point in the debate. The ancient world was undoubtedly familiar with the works of Herodotus, Livy, and Plutarch, let alone Bel and the Dragon and Lucian's The False Prophet, which establishes knowledge in the ancient world about how similar supernatural claims to those of Jesus, such as Romulus, Aristeas, Bel, and the snake god Glycon, could be easily explained away by the historians in a naturalistic manner. Accordingly, miracles and claims of the supernatural can be investigated by historians and subjected to falsification. Although the general populace tended to be credulous, the educated elite was not, as they were well versed in pre-Socratic philosophy, which transitioned from mythological explanations to rational, naturalistic, and law-like explanations of the physical universe. Furthermore, Plutarch devoted considerable efforts to providing naturalistic explanations for the widespread cultural phenomenon in antiquity, in which mortal beings vanish bodily, ascend to the heavens, and become gods. While Plutarch attempts to provide counter-narratives to the resurrection accounts of Romulus, Aristeas, and others hundreds of years after the so-called events, the one name curiously absent from his record is Jesus, which leads to my second point. If the resurrection of Jesus was merely a hoax orchestrated by the Galileans,
Did you want me to stop already? You wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, I think let me put the stopping points in there because I think I had it in your chat.
I didn't have it pulled up on Facebook because Facebook makes noise when people send you messages.
No worries. Let me send them over. So let's talk about my first point.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I opened up the conversation by giving a sort of historical outlook. One of Ehrman's points, I think, in the past with his debate with Lacona is that claims of the miraculous cannot be investigated either way, whether from a positive side or a negative side. Historians are not do not have the ability to investigate either way. But one of the things I wanted to kind of introduce in the opening few minutes was the fact that we have historians like Livy before the time of Jesus Christ and we have Plutarch actually reviewing Romulus, who, exhibited very similar supernatural claims to that of Jesus Christ. And one of the purposes of it is, when we look through the writings of Livy and Plutarch, is they do have a credible naturalistic explanation for what had transpired from the event of his ascension to even to the point of the patrician going before the Senate and saying, hey, almost like Luke's ascension narrative, that, Romulus came down and met him and told him that, let all the people know that I'm going to be the god of Rome forever and to make it great. Livy and Plutarch and even Cicero were able to show what had transpired in these events. And what we find in both Livy and Plutarch is we have the suspects of the senators. So they identify the senators as the prime suspects in the murder of Romulus. The senators actually used Proculus, the patrician who went before the Senate. At the instigation of the Senate, Julius Proculus went before him, said, hey, I saw them. And the purpose of that was to exonerate the senators, get them off their trail, make everyone feel good. The story's over. Case closed. So this is where we have two ancient historians in Plutarch and in Livy showing here are some naturalistic explanations, credible ones, to explain away the supernatural events of Romulus. I also included the story of Aristeas in Plutarch and Herodotus. Plutarch kind of likened that account. And once again, we have a very similar situation of Aristaeus dying in his native town in a fuller's shop. The fuller goes off to notify his kinsmen. There are people that said, no, he didn't die. I just met him. We just came back traveling abroad and we met this individual. So what we find in these ancient works is a credible naturalistic explanation for what had happened. And I wanted to conclude the point with the fact that the ancients weren't dumb. These weren't stupid people. And part of quoting Cicero that at the end there was to show that when we're talking about Romulus and all these dying and rising messiahs, that these are the superstitions of the unlearned. They didn't believe in this stuff. They thought it was fables. It was, something to appease the crowds. But the educated elite did not believe in things like this. But the ancient historians had information hundreds of years after the event to actually falsify the narrative. We have suspects. We have an explanation of what had happened, and case closed. Any thoughts on my initial point?
I have tons. So I've read some classicist works on Romulus's ascension. Mm-hmm. There are various forms of it. There aren't just one. And even among classicists, they debate over how to make sense of this or what's going on, and even which one's older, which one's not. In Ovid, I know we have an example in Ovid where there is no senatorial accusation for his death, that he just had an apotheosis where the gods took him. Some classicists argue that the murder by the Senate happened post Ides of March. And so the tradition of claiming that they murdered Romulus actually was influenced by the historical murder of Julius Caesar. And so there are some classicists who think that the myth that we find of the accusation there is actually a later version, and the earlier is just an apotheosis. So coming up with like a unified narrative, the way that you had like a natural explanation for that, huge ifs and question marks in mind for me. Okay. The part is this: we have opponents, like we have external historical sources that aren't written from the in-group that have, I'll just call them opinions, historical opinions. Oh, they're accusing them, to get them off the hook. One's claiming they actually witnessed it, whatever. The same accusation could be lobbed at Christians here. Now, I know that your point was simply to point out that like, no, like there is natural explanations that people are trying to do, even in the ancient world, to explain away the miraculous. But when it says the disciples stole the body, many scholars identify that, and maybe I'm jumping ahead. I don't want to take away from your thunder here.
Yeah, and that's going to be next on.
Okay.
And
I haven't seen it. So
yes. So, and the point here was just to show that there was knowledge in the ancient world. So what I wanted to do in the first segment was to establish,
lay the groundwork that there was a people were trying to make sense of it. Naturally, they were trying to explain it, and they were doing the best they knew how. Ultimately,
and I think one of the main points to walk away with is they weren't gullible, they weren't stupid, they weren't easily influenced. They had information to show that most of these were fables, they were made up. They were able to get to rationalistic explanations of what had happened. And there was multiple different scenarios. Did they kill him at the Temple of Vulcan? Did they chop up his body, hide him under? But the thing here in all these, and we'll get into Lucian's Alexander the False Prophet.
I love that, by the way.
Yes. And I think the beauty of it is they understood how to falsify similar supernatural claims to Jesus. So it wasn't something. Yes.
If I may just to lob one more criticism, but this criticism is more like it's rhetorical for you to answer. Is it not also, shouldn't you also consider that not everyone was a Lucian, not everyone was a Cicero, not everyone was an intelligent, highly elite thinker. So when we say they weren't idiots or they weren't, I'm not trying to, I think it's an unfair analysis to argue that someone is an idiot because they believe something that they have, for. So I'm just making the point that if there is a commitment to faith on something, they could be highly IQ intelligent and yet still be gullible or naive in that regard. So anyway, two-pronged question is intellectual elitism, someone who's actually like up here, but also the in-group, out-group. So they could be elite, but then also gullible to believing in things. Mm-hmm. But the outside group, educated, might have a criticism. So it's there's layers to this. Do you agree that could be the case here happening?
And I think one of the points I wanted to address in the opening, I know in Dr. Ehrman's debate with Lacona, he tried to promote this post-Enlightenment view that everyone in the ancient world was dumb and gullible. They attributed everything to the gods. And that's just not the case. The pre-Socratics got away from mythological explanations for volcanoes and everything else, the crops growing. So what I wanted to show is that in the ancient world, there was a lot of post-Enlightenment thinkers back then. So they resembled a lot of our attitudes and thought process, even in the ancient world. That's not something post-Enlightenment. There was people back in the ancient world that didn't buy into the whole supernatural.
Got it. Hey, super chats, we'll hit them as we go if that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Solera Knight, thank you for being a member. And the super chat, he says, humans do not resurrect from the dead. Not a single incident been documented outside myths that a human came back once totally brain dead for days.
At the very end of my debate, I'll have what we're talking about, or at least what I argue later on in the resurrection, is we're dealing with a singularity similar to the Big Bang. And I make this point at the end of my debate that the laws of physics do not hold at the Big Bang because they didn't exist yet. So we have a singularity there that violated the laws of physics because the laws of physics weren't even involved yet. So what
may I comment?
Yes.
Okay, I just have a comment. I don't want to keep this long because we want to keep we want to get through some of this tonight.
Yes.
But I do want to say, would you say it's a fair assessment then that the prior probability, since it's a singularity, would be so low in terms of our expectations based on the measurements and observations we have as human beings in the world? You could understand why a skeptic exists then. Like, you have to understand that if this is a one singularity, and I mean, like, all of the other evidence seems for me to suggest that it's more unlikely than likely if you took it how life works on a regular basis and everything as it goes naturally in the world, for this to happen, the prior probability that this is the case is just statistically so infinitesimally low, if you will. Would you agree?
No. So let me, and as someone that's very familiar with statistics, I think we're arguing the wrong side of the probability, because the probability is if a God came to Earth or entered history, what's the probability that he's going to do something amazing? And I think this is where we're looking at it maybe from the wrong side of the equation, because the probability is, if a God came to Earth and entered history, what's the probability he'd do something amazing?
Yeah, but that's, I guess, my critique, and you and I are going to have to debate in the future. We're brothers, man. We gotta do a real actual debate. Okay.
Yes.
I think we should move past this point, because I know that you and me will not agree. Okay. And that's okay. That's okay. Let's move forward.
Next stopping point is 1239.
Let's keep going then. Thank you so much for that super chat, Solera. You have divine abilities. You have singularities in your heart.
All right, here we go. Here's strange, given the numerous challenges from those in the best position to inspect the evidence, that there isn't a single credible record or tome from the Roman Empire, Sanhedrin.
By the way, yell at me. If I go past it on accident, yell at me.
Okay. Or the educated classes of Jews, Greeks, or Syrians, offering a naturalistic explanation for the events that transpired in Judea. The silence of a credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection in the surviving records is as significant as the silence was for Sherlock Holmes in the case of the dog that did not bark, establishing in legal terms a negative fact. Thus, the absence of those expected facts provides positive evidence supporting the validity of Jesus' resurrection. Consider the following. One of the earliest polemics by the Jews against Jesus and the resurrection is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and the Toledolph Jesu, which accuses the disciples of being suspects in a capital crime of grave robbery, an obvious advantage their enemies would not fail to exploit. Yet in the many legal settings and acts where the disciples are interrogated before the Jewish and Roman authorities, they are never suspected of or questioned about grave robbery, thus undermining the theory's credibility. Lucian, in The False Prophet, exposed the naturalistic techniques Alexander used to deceive the public into endorsing the deity Glykon. Despite ridiculing Christians as gullible for worshiping a crucified sage, Lucian did not produce a comparable treatise in antiquity about Jesus and the resurrection. Consequently, neither did Celsus, Porphyry, Julian, nor the legal authorities of the Talmud, all of whom accused Jesus of engaging in the magical arts and/or sorcery with the intent of defrauding the public. It is also noteworthy that Tacitus, Pliny, and Suetonius, who specifically referenced what they regarded as a destructive superstition among the Christians, statements consistent with the resurrection of Jesus, did not produce a historiography that falsified the resurrection. Likewise, Josephus' biographies provide insights into early Christianity and an account of Jesus' brother James. Nonetheless, no work refuting a resurrection hope, even though such a tome would have served Josephus well at the court of the Flavian emperors. Paul even argued his case regarding the resurrection of Jesus before Caesar's lieutenants, Festus and Agrippa, giving them an opportunity in their official capacity to falsify the narrative. However, no credible counter-narrative was offered in response to Paul's claims. In short, the dog that did not bark. In the absence of a credible counter... Stopping point here.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead and elucidate, and then I will respond. I definitely have things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Look, this is the exciting part about it.
No. This is good. So what I wanted to show is that there were attempts by those that I kind of coined in the best position to kind of inspect the evidence and make claims against them. So first and foremost, one of the earliest polemics that we see coming out of the Jewish tradition. So the Jews are witnesses they are witnesses to this event or to the times. So one of the earliest polemics that we have coming from them, and in the Gospel of Matthew, it records that the polemic was that, tell the disciple, or we're going to say that the disciples stole the body, and we're going to promote this all over. In addition, Justin Martyr and Tertullian both record the voices of the Jewish tradition as well from their arguments. Even in the 2nd century, they are still promoting this narrative. And the medieval document that we have, the Toledeth Hisu, also makes this claim. In that account, there was a cabbage farmer who had heard what the disciples were doing, grabbed the body from the tomb, put it in a cabbage pack, and they ran. We also have Lucian. Lucian did criticize the Christians as gullible. He attacks the sage. He did a fantastic work on. He did a really great job on Alexander the false prophet and exposing the natural techniques, how he was able to deceive the people into believing the deity Glycon. So what's interesting is, from the Jewish tradition, there's the charge of grave robbery, which I'll go into later, that talks about the what that would mean if they were publishing something like that in the ancient world. What would that mean? But if we think with that first and foremost, while they bring up all these charges of grave robbery throughout Acts, remember in Acts, the number of disciples are being brought before the Sanhedrin, the Roman authorities. And if this was such a credible narrative, why wouldn't they exploit it? That would be the number one thing, that they're pushing them before the Roman Empire to show, hey, these people are guilty of grave robbery. We need them killed. Mm-hmm. But in all the cases in Acts, that just does not happen. We don't see that at all. From what's interesting about Lucian is very interesting, that it does seem like there's a connection between him and Celsus, or him and Celsus, where he's writing to him almost like, hey, this is what I was able to do against Alexander the false prophet. It seems like their communication may be directed as, why didn't you bring up that? Another interesting point, in Plutarch, and I was talking with Dr. Ehrman about this. Plutarch is writing in the 2nd century, after sort of Pliny and Tacitus and Suetonius. So, and those historians are well aware of the Christians. They bring them up. As I pointed out, they all talk about the contagious superstition, which I believe is congruent with the resurrection. But they just leave it as there. It's this horrible, destructive superstition, but there's no answer from the Roman authorities. From any of these, these are some of the elites in the Roman Empire. And what's missing from their narrative is an explanation of what happened. And I think in Plutarch, one of the points I was discussing with Dr. Ehrman is, Plutarch, at the end of the life of Romulus, he makes some really interesting observations. He seems to be attacking the Christian view of the body and the soul ascending to heaven. Now, we understand that when Paul preached before Mars Hill, and he brought up that, Christ actually rose bodily from the dead, that really struck a nerve with the Greeks, because, the body is the sepulcher of the soul. The spirit does not incarnate. It does not become human. Those are two separate, distinct things. And while Plutarch is bringing up all these resurrection narratives, the one he leaves out is Jesus of Nazareth, which is interesting, because he's at the end of the life of Romulus. He's actually attacking that Christian view of the bodies of heaven and earth mixing together, that the body and the soul are ascending together. And that's more generally a Christian idea that's being proposed. That's what annoyed them on Mars Hill. It's like, what are you talking about? We could deal with the spirit, but the idea of the body and the spirit elevating together and rising up is very difficult. And Plutarch at the end of his treatise seems to be dealing. But the point,
because you're unloading a lot.
Yes.
And I think we got to be mindful too of my memory can only go so far on what I could respond to on these things, my points, but only because, you know, there's a lot of material here you're going through. Nathan Nadeau, who's actually a Christian from McMaster University, who has his PhD, wrote his thesis on this very issue, thinking the same thing you were describing, that there's a unique bodily resurrection idea, and that Greeks were like, no body only, spirit, pneumatic, if you will, and such. Whereas that is not the case. Greeks were not overall. That's not like a ubiquitous thing. Okay. So Plutarch could be just generally talking about particular philosophical ideas he has about ideas of apotheosis, resurrection, because resurrection and apotheosis in the New Testament have a lot of overlap. And that's a lot. There's a ton of scholarship on this that I'm not going to bombard you with. But let me get more into your actual data, because I think you're touching some interesting things. I wish, and I've said this, I've been saying this, because it's interesting you went with Alexander the false prophet instead of Peregrinus, because Peregrinus, I laugh every time I read that. Dude, if anyone like Lucian ever writes a death letter about me, I'm totally effed forever. Okay. Like that, he's the most scathing critic you do not want someone to write about you in. You know what I mean? And I do wish he wrote and was aware. Clearly, he did not know enough about or had any care to really write, or maybe we don't have it preserved, dealing with the Christians. He just kind of sees them as gullible. And in Peregrinus, he talks about that. He says, look, this guy, he was like their leader, their master. He taught at their synagogues. He was the man. He even wrote some of their books, all of this stuff. And then he goes on to say he gets imprisoned because he did something bad. Like I think he murdered someone or did something to a kid. I can't even remember, something really bad. And the Christians gathered to him in the prison, showing him love and all that and stuff. So I just side note to say, I really wish we had writings by Lucian about Christians so we could get a real critic early that like had something to say, because he's from the same region. So anyway, the other thing is the body going missing. So we fundamentally approach the New Testament completely different. This is not a debate time. This is a review of your debate. Okay. I'm just making the comment to say, I do not see the scriptures as parsimonious in the sense that like they are, harmonizing. I don't think Matthew's empty tomb narrative with putting guards at the tomb to keep them from coming and stealing the body or whatever, and then the accusation, I do not think that's Luke's agenda. So I do not expect Acts to address this thing, because I do not think Acts cares about that particular Matthean point. I think the Matthew's gospel, which is highly Judaized compared to the rest of these texts, we have to take Matthew. That's the difference between how we might approach the New Testament. And that's just a fundamental like precept that we both approach this with. You have a Christianized view. I have a skeptical, I'm going to take books, and even within the books, I might find contradictions and something going on. But we would just disagree on that. But I would say this too. You mentioned so much. I mean, going before kings and leaders and elites who should be able to falsify. I don't think we could falsify. I mean, we have forensics now, right? Like we have DNA, and we still can't capture cold case 20 years ago type stuff and finding out the details. And we have like modern empiricism and so much that is way better than what they had back then. So I don't know how you could tell a guy who's probably eating grapes and screwing concubines every other day, why he would care to go to falsify like an insignificant movement's leader, in my opinion. I just don't think it mattered early on. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And now I'm gonna get to that point, so I don't want to jump ahead to the argument. Now, I don't
want to like keep doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
But don't you now? Obviously, yeah, it'd be great if we had a work from Lucian on the Christians. Now, obviously, he addresses them. Celsus, who it appears Lucian is addressing, it seems like that's the same Celsus that he's talking about in his work, does actually address the Christians. But my point of this section was to show among the Jewish tradition, among the Greek tradition, among the Roman tradition, and you have all these voices that are speaking up about Christians that you don't find a work like Lucian or a Livy or Plutarch, providing a naturalistic explanation. One by itself, hey, that's great. And this is why I kind of let off with the dog that didn't bark. It's a negative fact. It's like you would expect somewhere among all the traditions, the Greek to Jews, that there would be a naturalistic explanation from someone, especially because they are taking a vested interest in trying to falsify the movement. But
you said the Jews, I mean, you brought up the Toledeth Yeshu, which is much later.
Yes.
But still there is early hints, I think,
at stealing the body. And we'll get to that point later on.
Okay, so you're still building on your case. Okay,
yeah, I'm still building.
So I don't want to steal your thunder. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to really just give you my honest skepticism, though. And I actually just wanted to clarify, because I heard somewhere that someone said, and this may not be a scholarly position, but someone argued that Peregrinus Proteus or Proteus Peregrinus looked a lot like one of the church fathers who dies by fire as well. I can't remember who, but the fact that Lucian mentions in the writing against Peregrinus that Peregrinus wrote many of their books. I wish we had more to know what he's talking about. I have no clue what he's talking about. And who knows, we may have lost these materials. They may be insignificant. Who knows? But if he wrote some materials and they were impactful, and he just so happened to be the name of some other character we don't know, that would be fascinating to discover. The other thing you mentioned that made me think about it was the Lucian and Celsus. I just wanted to find out. The Celsus connection, it says, is from Lucian's Alexander the False Prophet, not the death of the Peregrinus, of course.
Correct.
In Alexander, Lucian dedicates the work to a man named Celsus, whom he praises warmly as a fellow rationalist and debunker of fraud. The question of whether this is the same Celsus who wrote the Alethe's Logos, true word doctrine, against the Christians, the one Origen spent 8 books refuting in Contra Celsum, has been debated for a long time. The main problem is that Lucian explicitly calls his Celsus an Epicurean, while Origen's Celsus appears to operate from a broadly Platonist framework. Those are not easily reconciled philosophical commitments. Some scholars have tried to make the identification work, arguing Celsus was eclectic or that Origen mischaracterized him. And I've heard that, by the way, by modern scholars, so you might be onto something here. But the majority view today is that these are probably 2 different men named Celsus, or at minimum, the identification is unproven.
Yeah, it is debatable. The question is, Celsus is writing against the Christians. Lucian just did come out of work exposing Alexander the False Prophet. The connection seems more than coincidental that he's writing the true word. Alexander is telling him about this work. It's like, hey, this is how you would do it. It's almost like the framework for Celsus. You're already writing against the Christians. Here's something that would be.
I see what you're saying.
Yes, but we can move on.
We can't prove it, but I see why the data lends you some credibility. I see what you're saying.
So next stopping point will be 1621. So I think you'll.
Yes, sir. Here we go.
Narrative to Jesus' resurrection. It is natural that the educated elite of the ancient world in its campaign against Christianity, namely Celsus, Porphyry, and Julian, would focus on undermining the credibility of the witnesses to the alleged resurrection. Accordingly, they argued that the post-resurrection appearances of the women at the tomb, the disciples, and their followers were likely the result of hysteria, sorcery, or grief-induced hallucinations. Furthermore, they attacked what they framed as contradictory statements in the gospel. Dr. Ehrman also shares this view, asserting that the resurrection accounts in the gospels are far too contradictory to be considered reliable historical sources. Nevertheless, their arguments are inconsequential. No one is obligated to believe the women, the disciples, the statements in the gospels, Paul, or the 500 witnesses in Corinthians, given that the account of Jesus' resurrection provides falsifiable criteria that can be properly investigated and covered, constituting our third point in the debate. All that is required to falsify the resurrection of Jesus is either 1, produce in legal terms the corpus delicti, that is the body of the crime perpetrated by the Galileans, in a manner similar to how Rome achieved these ends against another religious cult, Bacchus, in 188 BC, by uncovering evidence of widespread criminal acts through informant testimony, resulting in mass arrests and the execution of cult members. 2, provide a credible tome from the ancient world that...
Let me get a pen and piece of paper because I'm going to forget some of these points. Bear with me 1 second. I need to. You're covering a lot here, and this ain't fair, Jonathan. It ain't fair. All right. This is good, though. I'm glad, like, nobody does this, okay? And I appreciate this. So just so you know, even though we aren't on the same page, I do appreciate this. So you brought up, just so I'm on the same page, you brought up the Bacchus thing, and you brought up
and remember
body.
Yeah. So remember, one of the points I bring up is, and it's just like any legal term, you don't have to produce the body to show that a crime was committed. So the fact of the matter is, you don't have to show the body. You just got to show that there was a crime committed, and how can you showcase that? So that's what corpus delicti is, the body of the crime.
Yeah, you know? I don't want to pause here because I have questions about the Bacchus thing too. I'm curious to get your thoughts on real quick, but let's keep going. You said 16 minutes what?
You can stop at 1621.
Okay.
Offers a naturalistic explanation of the event, like Lucian's treaty on the false prophet, which could be published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. Or 3, uncover the true identities of the gospel authors, assuming they were not the disciples of Jesus, and expose their myth, regardless of the publication date, comparable to the case reported by Tertullian in Asia Minor of a presbyter who was identified and deposed for composing a fictional text in the name of Paul. Remember, Paul advanced this argument during his hearing before Festus, the prefect of Judea, and Agrippa, the king of Galilee, in which he defended the resurrection of Jesus, explicitly stating that the king knoweth of these things, before whom I also speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him, for this thing was not done in a corner. Simply put, the resurrection of Jesus constitutes a historical and falsifiable event. Festus and Agrippa were well aware of the events that transpired in their respective jurisdictions and could have easily refuted Paul's claim if the resurrection of Jesus were indeed a hoax, which would have been published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. The basis for this conclusion is not speculation, but the fact that Eusebius records in his history that forged memoranda of Pilate and Jesus were published under Emperor Maximinus around 311 AD and sent to every district under his command with written instructions that they should be publicly posted for the view of all in every place, both in country and city, and that the schoolmasters should give them to their scholars to study. This reveals not only the empire's desire to challenge the alleged resurrection of Jesus, but also the methods by which it could be convincingly falsified. Were Festus and Agrippa unable to exercise to falsify the Christian narrative that was evident in the mind of Maximinus? By no means.
You stop here.
Furthermore, by implementing...
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I needed my pen and paper, bro.
Yeah. So, and let me comment a little bit on the last point. The fact that, and we're talking about the Roman emperor here. So we have Maximinus in 311 AD. Obviously, there was a civil war sort of going on to take control. Maximinus understood that, obviously, Christians in 311, starting to take over the Roman Empire. I think almost by that time, half of the Roman Empire are Christian. And obviously, there's a large pagan group as well fighting for control. So the Roman emperor took a very interesting strategic approach to Christianity, unlike Diocletian before him, who was like, well, I'm just going to destroy them and kill them, go after their books. He took a much more strategic marketing approach against Christians. What we're going to do is we're going to falsify their narrative. Mm-hmm. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to publish a tome similar to Lucian and the false prophet. We're going to spread it all throughout the empire. We're going to give it to all the scholars to read so they all understand what phony baloney this really is. And so the emperor understood, and it's also interesting, what he did is he published it under the official Acts of Pilate. What the Emperor Maximinus understood is that a Roman governor under Tiberius's administration, we're talking about a police state. So you can't operate freely in North Korea, Russia, any of these police state mentalities. Roman Empire, especially under Tiberius's administration, was the same way. Maximinus understood that Pilate would have had information, yay or nay, on there. And so what I'm going to do as part of my campaign against Christians is I'm going to publish a tome under, based on the official records of Pilate. Now, it turned out to be forged. He came out with a forged copy. But what he did as emperor, he knew, he's like, I'm going to post this all over the empire. It's going to be a tome discrediting Jesus and his resurrection. Everything that happened in the events in Judea, I'm just going to discredit. And I'm going to have a big marketing campaign to do that.
So just so I understand you properly, is that in 300 and something, right before
11 AD,
there was a campaign to falsify Christianity by pagans, specifically
by the Roman emperor, yes.
Right, top down. And they've created this Acts of Pilate propaganda to try and, hit the Christians where it hurts, to falsify their religion, their claims, so to speak, is what you're arguing. Or not just arguing, but that's kind of a known fact. Everyone knows that's a forgery.
Yeah. So, and so if you think about, so Maximum came out, he understood, think about it, in the 4th century, in 311 AD, when you had something that said the Acts of Pilate, everyone in the ancient world would understand what that means. These are imperial records. Pilate was governor at the time. He would have information on what transpired in his kingdom. And so Maximinus, as the emperor, understood that. So it sort of begs the question, from at least where we're at right now, is Paul went before Festus and Agrippa. I mean, and think about Agrippa. His grandfather was Herod the Great. They have a long history of overseeing that entire area. I mean, Jesus and his family, they were Galileans. They have tremendous history. They were the ruling authorities over there, and they understood everything. And I'll go into some of these points later on all the spies they sent after Jesus. Okay. But the point of the matter is the thinking of somebody like Maximinus II is really no different than Agrippa, or Agrippa before Paul. I mean, except he's much closer to the event. So this is why Paul tells them in there, the king knows of these things because nothing was hid from him. This was all done in the corner. So why do I bring up the Bacchus conspiracy? Because what now in the 2nd century, a lot of what Pliny the Elder argues against Christianity is all these pedophilia and these their cannibalistic cravings, with the Eucharist. So they kind of foreshadow that group, and we understand from Levy's investigation of the Bacchus how they used informant testimony. And they show how the Roman Empire operated. They used the highest levels, or the lieutenants, to go and investigate this. They don't trust this to any small person. This is why you see Pilate investigating Jesus. Why is someone like Festus, the prefect of Judea, and Agrippa meeting with Paul? He's not a patrician. He's not super wealthy. I mean, you have the highest levels of the government coming out. And what Paul is telling them to their face is, this is your kingdom. You obviously understand everything that's going on. And that point will be established later on in my thesis. They have the ability to investigate. They have informants all over the town. Why weren't they able to produce something to falsify the entire event at that time? And you could have done it 3 different ways: either show what had happened, produce a tome like Lucian, or if the argument is, these aren't the works of the apostles, these are someone else. Well, Tertullian was able to show someone composing a fictional text in the name of Paul. He was exposed. There's like, this is not from Paul. That's all you had to do to falsify Christianity. And we don't have that. But what the acts of Emperor Maximinus in 311 AD shows, they understood what was needed to falsify Christianity. They could have done it in the 1st century. They could have done it in the 2nd. They could have done it in the 3rd. Why don't we have that? Obviously, Maximinus does establish that knowledge. He understood what they needed to do. He was obviously interesting emperor, but this would be the mindset of all the emperors.
So there's a lot there.
Yes, it's all set up.
You have a lot. No, you have a lot to say, and I know you're saying your argument here, and I'm sure I already know nerves, and you're in the middle of a debate, and there's no way you can get everything covered. So I wrote down some of the things you talk about in the opening, but then also you covered again there. A couple comments here. Celsus and Porphyry. I really wish we had Porphyry's work. Oh my gosh, it would be amazing to have his actual work. Too bad his work, uniquely unlike most of them, while they may not have been preserved, they've been preserved through critics, right, who are quoting them. Yes. Porphyry's work was intentionally, like, there were edicts by Christian emperors to burn his works, to eliminate his works from existence.
Yes.
I don't know if it was because his works were harsher. I wish we had them, because I would be curious to see them. But you mentioned hysteria. So both Porphyry and it seems to suggest, based on the data that we have from fathers, that Porphyry is arguing along similar lines in some sense to what Celsus, or Celsus, however you want to pronounce his name, is. Celsus elsewhere does argue in comparative mythology to some extent, saying, look, we already have Zalmoxis. You guys aren't unique, is his point. He ultimately showing other resurrection appearance people that, you're not the first, you're not special, is his kind of argument. But then he does argue hysteria specifically for Magdalene, but then the other guys, like, he either means like they're hallucinating or they want to believe so badly, is the way he's trying to assess it in the ancient world without the knowledge of cognitive dissonance, which we know today. So this might be an ancient way of trying to explain why they wanted to believe so bad. And of course, he's not doing any of the work that you're asking for, which is, let's find the body or falsify this thing somehow. I don't think it would be possible, personally. Okay, that's just me. Now, I want to just comment on a few other things, and I know you want to respond to that.
Oh, yeah, no, keep going.
Well, can you remember you had something in your mind, so I don't want you to lose it. Are you able to remember?
Yeah, I think a common theme here, and I think it's important to pick up on the common theme, and this is where it brings in Lucian as well. The Talmudic scholars in the Babylonian Talmud accused Jesus of sorcery. Porphyry goes along those lines, the magical arts, and we see that same comment in Celsus. So they have this view that whatever he's doing, we cannot explain. And this is where, in the Jewish tradition, and the reason why I brought up Bel and the Dragon is that they're very familiar with the magical arts, or these depictions of sorcery, or these magical tricks. But even in the Jewish tradition, they didn't know how Jesus was doing it, because there's all these miracle claims in the gospel. And what that would seem to point out to, that Celsus, Porphyry, and the Babylonian scholars are like, well, it probably was induced by sorcery, or they're trying to figure out, because they cannot explain how the magic worked.
Yeah, I know Celsus talks about a lot of, he compares it to Egyptian magic, and he gets a lot of that. But mind you, we're also dealing with a time in which Christianity, especially Gnostic forms of it, are appearing in Egypt. And there's a lot coming out of Egypt at that time of Christian thinkers, both Gnostic and not Gnostic, or people who use the term gnosis for themselves, but they may not have been categorized as heretics by the church. I do want to make mention of Bacchus, the thing you mentioned about Bacchus, because I know there are classicists, like, I think it's a consensus thing, that argued that the debacle in 186 BCE was more propagandistic or hysteria, literally hysteria. So, we talked about hysteria that they're accusing of Jesus, but that there was a social hysteria or a political move against the cult of Bacchus. Not that they were able to then prove they were cannibals or prove they were doing these horrific acts. The same way a lot of Christians who were pointing at other heretics in their writings, you read up the Panarion. I mean, if you open up the Panarion, you're going to find all sorts of stuff and accusations about other Christian groups doing this and that and disgusting, crazy stuff. A lot of the scholars think there may be some truth to somewhere, but a lot of it seems like it's what you do to down your enemy. You disparage them. If you're trying to take a woman's credibility away, especially in a patriarchal world, well, what you do is you identify her as someone who gets around. She's easy, and it ruins her reputation based on just the rumor. And I say that to say it works even with cults and the way that one's arguing politically. We do it today. Look at the left versus right, right? Okay. Now, I'm mentioning all sorts of stuff because you said a bunch, but I want to say this. You and me are fundamentally approaching Acts completely different. You believe that Paul was before Festus and Agrippa, and this is a historical moment, and it happened, and that they should then all of a sudden decide they're going to really go and fact check the resurrection claims. I very much doubt that ever even happened at all, right? Because we approached the text completely different. I think Acts was constructed post Josephus. And I think there's a very strong case to be made based on Steve Mason's work, but that just goes to show you and me are approaching Acts fundamentally completely different. And so I feel like you're making a mountain out of a text where I'm like, it's not even a molehill to me. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
and I would say I'm going to provide a lot of supporting evidence further to go into the mindset of the Roman Empire on why they would have looked into it. But that does come later in the thesis.
I would like to just make a comment. I wrote this down because you said it. Resurrection should be falsifiable. The resurrection. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it would be if decades have passed, if years have passed. I don't know how.
Well, let me give you an example. So in Eusebius, he quotes a work from Hegesippus that says that the Emperor Domitian, he was real concerned about, and this will go into a later point later, but what it establishes that even after the fact, the Roman Empire could investigate. Now, remember, Maximinius in 311 AD, he believed he had information to falsify Christianity even 300 years later. Plutarch is writing, 400 or 500 years after the supposedly life of Romulus. He has information.
What information does he claim, though? Because if he's not produced a body and it's just rumors that Jews say the body was stolen or something, because I know Celsus brings that up too. He
does. So, and
Celsus's sources were Jews. He had a lot of Jewish sources. Even Celsus was relying on. So, I'm just devil's advocate here, man.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to spoil the point because I'll go into it. What's the effect? But I think the thing is, we're talking about an event in Judea where the Roman Empire had obviously jurisdiction over. Herod, the disciples were Galileans. Obviously, they'd be very concerned about making sure nothing erupts, which I'll talk about later. But the fact of the matter is they had spies all over the empire. Herod, in the Gospels, it's interesting, or it's not interesting really. They're coming to Jesus and asking him his thoughts on taxes because, the Herods would be very concerned about a group not wanting to pay taxes. That's what Caesar Tiberius would want, make sure the collection of the revenue. They're sending people all over to follow Jesus, keep an eye on him, watch what he's doing. So, and I'll go into this later on, but these figures were very aware of everything that was going on. These are police states. This is like North Korea. Anything that's going on in their jurisdiction, they're very aware of. And I go into a whole section of this, Derek, because I want to dispel the notion that people didn't care, they weren't aware. That's not the Roman Empire. That's
So
not.
you and we might have a sword fight there.
We're going to have a sword fight.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm going to be bringing out a ton of sources,
okay,
and then you'll have opportunity to go against. But
okay,
if there was a tomb in Jerusalem, or if there wasn't a tomb in Jerusalem, all you had to say is there was never no tomb. There was no Joseph of Arimathea. That falsifies it pretty quick. And the report that I was referring to from Hegesippus is that the Emperor Domitian went back to find the relatives of Jesus, or the grandsons of Jude, and to interrogate them just to understand, to make sure that there's no uprising in his area. But what it establishes is that the Roman Empire, even 30, 40, 50 years after the event, understood they could look for information on what happened. Not to mention, Maximinius understood that in the Imperial archives, there would be records of the event, positive or negative. He understood that there'd be records. And if there would be records, it would be in Caesarea, an area that was under his jurisdiction, where he can find information on what had happened. And I do go into more of these points as we go further.
Yeah. Just one comment to say, and then I want to move on. 40 years and an entirely raising of Jerusalem, where these tombs would be located and stuff, I'm doubtful. I mean, after you've had the entire empire, like the Roman Empire and their legions come in and crush this entire city, it wasn't just the temple. They razed Jerusalem and its surrounding areas. All that evidence you're hoping still exists when the Gospels, we think, were written, unlike maybe you think they're written before 70, we think they're after. Good luck finding that data, and I doubt anyone's going to go move the rubble to try and find it. But anyway, you and me might have different differences. Okay, so let's keep going. Well, we do, but let's have fun. What's the next stopping point?
Next stopping point is 1820.
Okay.
In this course of action, the empire revealed its hand in a manner that materially strengthens our case for the resurrection. The act of forging Pilate's memoranda explicitly suggests that an original imperial record existed, containing credible intelligence about the events in Judea. It is worth noting that Christians had long petitioned the empire to release the official acts of Pilate. Therefore, as emperor, why would Maximinian...
Sounds like release the Epstein files, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
We want the files. Give
exactly. He published a forged memorandum from Pilate when he had access to the official empire's records in Caesarea. The evidence suggests he had something to hide. We have on record two ancient witnesses, Justin and Tertullian, who not only affirm that Pilate's acts existed, but also provide testimony about their contents, which corroborates the principal assertions of the gospel, thereby furnishing our case with a body of testimony from an objective and impartial source. Justin Martyr in 150 AD published his defense of Christianity to the Emperor Antonius in the Roman Senate. In that defense, he cites prophecies concerning Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection, and refers 3 times into that same work to the acts recorded under Pontius Pilate, attesting all these events took place, as you can verify from the acts of Pilate.
I just want to say, no matter what Bart ultimately thinks, I could see him going, this is different. This is unique. No one's done this kind of argument to try and, make the case. So anyway, let me keep going.
Tertullian addressed the Roman magistrates in his apology to affirm the divinity of Jesus, highlighting his miracles and resurrection. He referred twice to a report submitted by Pilate to Tiberius that confirmed these events and openly challenged the Roman authorities to consult their histories on the matter. Although these reports aren't conclusive, we will present a comprehensive collection of circumstantial evidence to establish a set of substantial facts from one which can logically infer and corroborate the reports in question, thereby affirming the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
So let me lead in with one report, point for you. So what I'm trying to illustrate here, because once again, there are, So you have Maximinius in 311 AD appeals to an Acts of Pilate, which, even though it was a forged one, he understood that records would exist on the events that transpired in Jesus. Now we have 2 2nd century legal voices for the Apostolic Church writing to the Roman magistrates. So obviously Tertullian is writing, and what he says specifically in there is consult your histories. Don't believe me for this, check on it. But I do want to lead in with this question with you and get your thoughts. What I'm doing here, and once again, this is an argument from the ancient church. So I have 2 independent sources. I mean, Tertullian and Justin are not talking, calling each other up on the phone or sending emails. Here's what we're going to do to force this narrative. We have 2 individual legal voices for the church that says there is evidence in the official Roman archives that confirms the event happened. Now, if this is true, Derek, what this would establish for our case is that we have an objective and impartial witness to the main assertions of the Gospels. Jesus was doing all these miracles, and he rose from the dead. So we have 2 individuals. Now, on their own, while it's obviously very interesting claims that they're making, okay, there's a lot that has to be unpacked for that. But the case that I'm bringing, and this is why I kind of move off the Gospels. The Gospels, obviously, as a Christian, that's our primary source. But what I'm introducing in this case for the resurrection is that we have a third party or an independent, objective, and impartial witness, the Roman Empire, that can testify to that fact. And that's what Justin and Tertullian, when they're writing to the Roman magistrates, that's what they're saying. We have evidence.
What letter is that in, by the way? Do you recall?
Yes, I do.
Just so I can go read this later myself.
Yes. So I put it for Justin.
Now you're talking about Justin Martyr is saying this?
Yes, he does. He says it 3 times. He appeals to it. So
okay.
If you look in his first apology, chapter 35, you'll see on the slide that I brought up, and that these things did happen. You can ascertain from the Acts of Pontius Pilate. He's not referring to a forgery. He is writing to the Roman Senate and Emperor Antonius at that time. Go check for yourselves. And
I'll
then
pull it up here.
Yeah.
So people can see it.
Oh yeah. If you want to go back to the slide.
Well, you have it there?
Yeah, I have it there on the slide. So Acts, so they need to go back just a little.
Is it right there?
That's Tertullian.
Okay, is that what the other source is? Just so I need to write that down.
That's the other one. So Tertullian Apology, chapter 21, and then Tertullian Apology, chapter 5.
Apology 21 and 5.
And then if you go back just that one slide, that's going to take you to Justin. And in there,
35 and 48.
I have the full quote. So this isn't an argument from silence. And it would explain, think about if we're trying to piece together the history, why would Maximinius in 311 do it? Because there was calls by the Christians that said, you guys are a witness to this fact. Release the Epstein files, per se.
Yeah.
Release the records of Kennedy. We know what happened, release the records, which goes to the point, why did he release the forged one if he would have had the official records?
So just so I'm looking at this clearly, and I want to understand, I want to stillman you. And as the prophet spoke, they tortured him and set him on the judgment seat and said, judge us. And the expression, they pierced my hands and my feet, was used in reference to the nails of the cross, which were fixed in his hands and feet. And after he was crucified, they cast lots upon him, his vesture, and they that crucified him parted it among them. And these things did happen. You can ascertain from the Acts of Pontius Pilate, first apology. So what do scholars that you have come across say about the Acts of Pontius Pilate?
Well, so now here's one of the questions to Dr. Ehrman. One of the first questions I asked him is, do we have any ancient rebuttal testimony? Because if you think about it, Julian the Apostate was a Roman emperor. He tried to move back to paganism. And I asked him, do we have anyone in the ancient world like Julian the Apostate who would have been very familiar with Justin's work or Eusebius's work, where this information is also found, or Celsus, who appears to be very familiar with Justin Martyr's arguments? Mm-hmm. Do we have any rebuttal testimony? And because that's the question for me. Do we have anyone that contradicted what they said? Because the only one that we seem to have a response from is Maximinius, the Roman Empire, but he produced a forged one, which begs the question, doesn't that lead to our case being true? You had information that was positive for Christianity, but you decided to bury it and come out with a forge to control the narrative. Now, scholars today, and I'll be honest, I've debated Dr. Richard Carrier, and I brought up these points. Ehrman, they're gonna obviously not agree. There's a lot of Christian scholars who say, "Oh no, they don't know what they're talking about." But we're talking about someone from the 21st century, in comparison to someone that was part of the ancient world. The Roman Empire was available at that time, and I will go into the circumstantial evidence. How did they get access to records like this? So I do establish those points. Which is critical. But typically what you would need at first is some rebuttal testimony from the ancient world that said they were BS, that they are full of shit. They're talking about a forgery. We know forgeries existed on the Acts of Pilate. There's the Gospel of Nicodemus, I think in the 4th or 5th century, which is sort of a response to what Maximinius did in 311. But they're writing to the Roman magistrates. All Rome had to do at that time is, all right, we're going to publish the documents. Jesus was a magician. We investigated. We looked at the information. And what Justin is saying there is all these events were recorded and investigated. The Roman Empire knew every aspect of what was happening in their province, which they should, and which I'll go into. But think about it like this. What my case is making, Derek, and I want you to comment on it. We have an independent third party that can testify, that can corroborate the main assertions of the gospel, in the sense that Jesus was doing all these miracles and that go against natural law, and he rose from the dead. And the Roman Empire were a witness to that fact. That they were able to testify. And these records have that evidence to support our claims of the gospel. And that's what Tertullian and Justin are doing.
Yeah. So I that's why I asked you, like, where is this at? Number one, I wanted to get my eyes on it. But also number two, I'd have questions from there, right? So now that I see they mention this, now I go, how could a Justin martyr know about sources that supposedly Antinous doesn't know about, or are supposedly in Roman records he has access to, but they don't? Or are we going to put they're deceiving and lying and trying to hide this evidence? Or like conspiracy theories start to come up, because now I start going, well, how trustworthy is Justin in terms of his reporting here, right? As a human, these are questions you'd have. How trustworthy is the Roman Empire? How trustworthy would they be on their records? Is there such a thing? And is this a bluff? Is this a way? Because he's under persecution. He's clearly trying to say, look, hey, we believe nothing different. He says in Apology, I think it's 51:40, something like that. Nothing different from what you do. Hermes, the Logos, Dionysus, ripped asunder Bacchus. He gives us a list and stuff. So is he bluffing to get them off his back and go, no, the record support? Is he doing it because he wants them to check the records and hoping there's something there, but he can't access them? How does he know about the existence of these records? I have questions about that. The other thing is I would just add in, for me, with my personal like the research that has led me to thinking that people fabricate things in the Christian tradition, which is not unique in my opinion. It's all over in all traditions. I do not just want to pick on Christians, but that eyewitnesses, like 2 Peter 3 is pretty much ubiquitous amongst critical scholars as, a fake Peter. This Peter's not really writing it, right? According to the critical scholars. I think even Eusebius doubted 2 Peter was written by Peter. Few church fathers actually were critical of it. Yeah. When you read 2 Peter 1, we did not believe in cleverly devised myths. We were eyewitnesses. Okay. Most of the critical scholars I know are like, someone's saying they're Peter, they're not, right? I know that this bucks against the tradition because this is canon. I mean, once you go against canon, you got a problem as a Christian. But when they're willing to say they were eyewitnesses of something, and then they just practically do a quote of a text from the gospel in 2 Peter to fill in the blank as if they were eyewitnesses on the mountain in Matthew. I think it's a reference to Matthew's post-mortem appearances. It seems like the language is there. I just have questions, man, when Christians are doing that, but it's not just Christians. If we ask this of Muslims, like if a Muslim's like, no, and it sounds like, you're trying to like validate and vindicate your faith here. You're trying to prove and be an apologist for your truth. It doesn't mean they are. I just leave that on the table as a possibility. But if he is telling the truth, I want whatever he found. But it's weird. He's saying, go check your Acts of Pilate as if he doesn't have it. Like you would think like, how did he read? Where did he find it? You know what I mean? Like, how did he access it?
Yeah. And so I go into that in the next part. I actually go through to talk about the records, because I think it's important to show how would they have access to records, which obviously they'd have better records than us today.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you want to go to where are we at what point?
We're 1727.
17 or 1620?
I need to go up a little actually, because I went backwards. So we're going to go right up to right there. Circumstantial evidence substantiating Justin and Tertullian's purport, therefore affirming the resurrection of Jesus. So that's
okay.
1820.
Okay. Yeah, and let's stop at 1930 because it'll go into your next point.
Yell at me just in case I don't see it.
First, let's establish the type of records produced by the empire relevant to our case and their accessibility to future administrations and the public for inspection. Regarding Pilate's acts, Cicero confirms that the prefect of Judea was required to deposit 2 copies of his account in the 2 principal cities of his province and place 1 in the treasury. For context, the trial, sentence, and crucifixion of Jesus were official acts of Pilate in his administration of Roman authority, and the law was imperative regarding Pilate's duty to report, especially charges against one who had disturbed the peace and was guilty of treason against the throne. Remember, Julius Caesar's first enactment was that the proceedings of both the Senate and the people should be compiled and disseminated daily for public consumption. Tacitus and Suetonius used these acta as sources for their histories of Rome's early emperors. Given their respective backgrounds, Tertullian's legal and imperial connection, and Justin's residence in Rome, they were well positioned to access the official documents cited in their works. All right. Secondly, to stop there. All right. So one of the things I want to establish for circumstantial evidence is, first, would Pilate have had acts? And the case there by Cicero, especially this kind of new union that's happening with Judea and the Roman becoming allies early on, is that Pilate would have to deposit his acts. Now, obviously, Tiberius micromanaged everything in the sense that he was aware of everything. It was just very dark times for Rome. He was a competent emperor, but he kept his finger on the dial just with everything that was going on in his administration. Pilate would have had to deposit his records. If he ever got accused of corruption or anything else, he would have to have his records to explain what had happened in the empire. under his jurisdiction. And what Cicero shows is not only he has to deposit it in the 2 areas of his province, but he had to put one in the treasury. So if there was a fire somewhere, you have more than one copy, so they wouldn't be lost. So that's the first point. The second thing that I mentioned there is from the time of Julius Caesar up until probably late 2 or maybe 300s, is that under Julius Caesar and preceding emperors, they made a lot of information available. The Acta Durum that I kind of bring up is those were like the daily acts translated. They become like the newspaper or the Daily Gazette. Suetonius used it to find information on Caligula. And these are things that were published for the people, the acts of the Senate. So remember, Justin Martyr had access to the forum where stuff was published out there. These are men of the ancient world. They have their resources. And there was a lot of information that the Roman Empire made public. Now, one of Tertullian's comments is when he talks about Tiberius bringing it before the Senate. Well, that would show up in the Acts of the Senate, which was also made public. So we're talking about records that were made public by the Roman emperors for the people for over a couple hundred years, leading into Justin's and Tertullian's time. And I think even more importantly, the slide that I show, if you look at Justin's work and Tertullian, Justin, like on the census records. So if you go to like First Apology 34, he says,
you now, show it, or are you good?
You can show it if you want. It's that other slide where I say records of the Roman Empire.
Not that one, is it?
No, further up. No, further up. No, yeah, go forward. Oh. Yeah, forward. No, go back. Sorry.
We were just there, so.
Maybe yeah, right there.
Okay, yep.
So this is the Acta Durma by Julius Caesar, where he had made the records public to the people. So Acts of the People, Acts of the Senate, a lot of important events would be communicated. And just like Suetonius and Tacitus in the 2nd century were able to draw on that information, public records, for their histories. If you go to the very next slide.
Okay.
Yes. And in here, we have information from Eusebius and Jerome on Tertullian's legal background. He was very knowledgeable of Roman law. His father was a proconsul centurion. They were in Rome. You know, obviously, you're talking about people that have context. You know, and if you look at their writings, you have Justin on the census records. Now, there's a village in the land of the Jews, 35, stadium from Jerusalem, in which Jesus Christ was born, as you can ascertain also from the registers of taxing made under. You know, so they're quoting a number of records in their works. Now, these are men of the ancient world. Tertullian cites census records too. Where is he getting this information? Now, obviously, someone familiar with Roman law who was in Rome. His father was a centurion. Obviously, they're demonstrating knowledge in their writings and their background, why they would have access to information. You know, Justin mentions a petition submitted by Christians named Ptolemaeus to the prefect of Egypt. He's going to official records throughout his treaties. And we see that in Tertullian as well. You know, so we can't just assume that no one had information. They did a really good job. I mean, just like, I mean, the Roman historians, they were using records of this type as well. So they had access, and people in these circles could have access to them as well.
So wouldn't you say, though, it seems like a bit on faith to me. Like, because you have to trust Justin, you have to trust Tertullian. How do they have this? Where's the source? And How did they have access to this? Like, how did they know this material? But the emperor, and then you just said Tertullian, or not Tertullian, Tiberius Tiberius Caesar. Like, they were in dark times and they knew everything. They had their hands on the pulse.
Well, yeah, they did have a pulse, and that's what I'm going to go into the next point. So, if you want to move to the next point, because this really goes into the heart of the matter, because we see things here, Derek, that gets us to raise the eye. Why are Christians getting treated a little differently here? Or there's something. So let's go from 1930 to 2037.
Okay, I'm gonna go right here. Let's do it.
And there works. Secondly, Tertullian's assertion that Pilate reported to Tiberius the account of Jesus and the resurrection is entirely consistent with the evidence. According to Eusebius, under an ancient custom observed among provincial governors, it was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events to ensure that nothing was concealed from the emperor. As an example of such reporting is Pliny the Younger's correspondence to Emperor Trajan. For context, it was the increasing popularity of Christianity, which Pliny regarded as a contagious superstition spreading throughout the province, that necessitated a report to Trajan as a matter requiring the emperor's immediate attention. Given the volatile post-resurrection climate, reports circulating about the alleged resurrection of Jesus, and the climate of fear in Tiberius's administration following Sergianus's execution, Pilate would not risk concealing the event from Tiberius. To prevent accusations of failing to manage the crisis and to control the narrative, Pilate would have issued a report to Tiberius justifying his actions. All right, so stop right there.
Okay.
So let's talk about reporting requirements. Now, Trajan was a great emperor. He was a more enlightened emperor. He had a better character to himself. He was nicer. So think about it. Just Pliny, who's the governor of Bithynia at that time, he notices Christians are starting to spread throughout his province. They're promoting this contagious situation. Mm-hmm. He reported that immediately to the emperor to let him know, here's what's going on. I do have some questions about how I need to handle it. So think about it. What my thesis is conveying is there's records. There would have been a report, because that's what Tertullian and Justin are basically saying. There was a report that was submitted. So if we think about Trajan, who's entirely different than Tiberius. Tiberius, and what's interesting, in 31 AD, October 31 AD, the individual that he had appointed to run affairs in Rome while he took up a strategic position in Capri had backstabbed him. He was trying to take over the entire empire from Capri. Tiberius got wind of what he was trying to do, and he set up Sergianus. Now, why this is important, and this is where we have to deal with the facts on the ground, what was happening at that time. Now, Pilate came into the administration in 26 AD. It would be pretty notable that he was running the affairs of Rome while Tiberius was at Capri, that most likely Pilate owed his appointment to the prefect in Judea to Sergianus. So now, after Sergianus got exposed by Tiberius, and they killed him, they threw him down the steps, his family, anyone that was associated with him would have been killed. And they did. Tiberius had them all killed. His wife committed suicide. It was horrible times. Anyone that was associated, most people tried to kill themselves before they had to go through Tiberius's treason trial. So you have to understand, this was going on. Tacitus explains this went on for years. The rest of the administration, Tiberius had lost his son because Sergianus and his wife was responsible. It was a horrible time. So this is what's going on in Pilate's head. And Pilate, and I'll go into this in a little bit, Pilate has already mismanaged some stuff with Tiberius, and Tiberius was very mad with Pilate. So think about it. All of a sudden, you have these a crucified victim where someone's claiming to be risen from the dead. You have all these Christians spreading this message. He would have to report that. Can you imagine the Jews saying, hey, someone just stole the body? And, you know, that getting back to Tiberius? And it's like, what the hell's going on is an uprising about to occur? So, yay or nay, Pilate would have had to report something to Tiberius. He was under a watchful eye. Everyone in the administration was under a watchful eye. So treason trials were going on. It was a climate of fear. You couldn't let something get back to the emperor that you didn't want to get in front of and control the narrative. I mean, think about if someone was spreading bad stories about you, Derek. Mm-hmm. You know, the first person I'm reporting to is my emperor, my wife, Savannah, because I need to get in front of the narrative. And I'm sure you would report back to your wife before stories start going out there. And just as our wives are, Tiberius was a force to be reckoned with. Pilate would be forced to report back. Here's what's going on. I'm controlling it. Here's what's happening. Win, lose, and draw.
First of all, if I was to try to do if I'm trying to prove Christianity or trying to do the best I can, I would attempt doing what you are doing right now. Okay. I have too many questions and too many unanswered questions that I don't think you can answer either. Okay. We can assume that he would have to report all these things. Okay. Where are those records? Okay. If we've lost them to history, then we're making a bit of a leap and we have to just go, well, we think he would have, and therefore if he would have had to report these things, that's where this notion from Justin Martyr comes up that there was an Acts of Pilate and he would have had records of this material. The question still arises, how did Justin have access to this material, number one? Number two, I mean, there's so many questions I have, but even the other problem is as we're approaching the Gospels differently, you're playing it like these things that we're reading in the Gospels are happening in the 30s as written in the Gospels. And I am so much more like, before we even get there, I'm like, we're dealing with material 40 years or more later. In my estimation, that there's evidence in Mark, the earliest, I believe that is. I know you think Matthew, but that this is post-war, and we're just approaching it differently, right? So this is something that you and I can do in the future, like if we have a debate. But the other thing is like, even if I grant everything you just said, that yeah, Pontius Pilate couldn't fart without writing it down on a piece of paper. I farted at 9:37 a.m. with breakfast. Okay. Send that to the emperor. He'll know that I'm like being a good boy. We don't have those records. We have none of that material. And you have to make a leap to say in those records, because they did give notes to the emperor and they did let them know what was happening, that somehow in that information is the Acts of Pilate material. But then two is one more thing. Sorry, I'm just making one more.
No. Mm-hmm.
It's necessary I make this next one, I believe. Because if Pontius Pilate didn't kill this man that Christians assume are innocent. See, I'm willing to think Jesus may not have been innocent. Okay. You may not have that same shared outlook. Because I think a man who's willing to go into a temple lashing people and flipping over money changers, when Rome would have looked at that and said, hell no. If Pontius Pilate didn't kill that guy, he'd have had his head taken. So either way you slice it, I imagine if a guy did commit such a deed, let's say he did cleanse the temple, I find it odd that Josephus doesn't note that. He does for Judas the Galilean, but no Jesus mentioned for that. He has this pretty fanciful story, in my opinion, that sounds kind of friendly to the Jesus stuff. And so I find that odd. So I just have questions, Jonathan. And those have questions, and those questions and questions.
And those are going to be answered when we get into the next part.
Okay. You tell me where to go. I am 2039 is where we're at right now.
2039. So let's go to 2233.
Okay.
What would have compelled Pilate or Herod to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the alleged resurrection? Simply put, why would Pilate, Herod, or the empire have even cared? For the same reason, Pilate was concerned about a Samaritan prophet who had assembled a multitude to ascend Mount Gerizim in search of sacred artifacts, and about Galilean worshippers offering sacrifices in the temple, because Pilate perceived the gatherings as a rebellious uprising rather than a religious exercise. More importantly, Pilate would be especially concerned about how Tiberius would interpret his handling of the situation surrounding Jesus. Having been severely reprimanded by Tiberius for his mismanagement of the Gilded Shields incident, Pilate could not afford another crisis. Pilate's mindset is no different than that of Antipas. Josephus records that Antipas imprisoned and executed John the Baptist to prevent an uprising. Understandably, Antipas would not risk being blamed and deposed for a messianic uprising, as his brother was. Remember that the Pharisees explicitly warned Jesus that Herod sought to kill him. They accused Jesus of stirring up the people and perverting the nation, and sent spies to monitor him in Jerusalem, indicating that Jesus' influence over the people could lead to rebellion. Furthermore, Eusebius even reports that after the final overthrow of Jerusalem, Vespasian ordered a thorough search of all who claimed descent from the house of David to eliminate any hope of restoring the royal house of the Messiah, as the empire was highly concerned about insurrection. This demonstrates the perceived threats that the Roman emperor and his lieutenants would associate with a movement like that of Jesus and his disciples. Moreover, in the aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion, the propagation of a resurrection claim, if fraudulent, would be perceived by Pilate and the empire as a provocation to insurrection, necessitating swift repressive action to prevent civil unrest. According to Dr. Richard Carrier, if the two...
Dude, hold on. You said Richard Carrier in front of Bart Ehrman?
Yes.
Oh, no, you did not. No, you did not.
You know he loved that quote.
Bro, dude, he hates Richard Carrier, bro.
I know. That probably put it back a little bit.
I can't imagine. I can't believe you did that. Sorry to interrupt. All right,
no, it's hilarious. The tomb was empty, and Christ's followers reported that he continued preaching to them and remained at large. Pilate would be compelled to assume an escape had occurred and would have to haul every Christian in and interrogate every possible witness in a massive manhunt for what could only be, to his mind, an escaped convict, who was not only guilty of treason against Rome for claiming to be God and King, as all the Gospels allege, but now also guilty of escaping justice and continuing to lead a rebellion. And the Sanhedrin would feel the equally compelling need to finish what they had evidently failed to accomplish the first time, finding and bringing Jesus to justice. As Dr. Carrier correctly observes, none of this occurs. However, the pertinent question remains, why doesn't it occur? Considering...
Stop right there.
Okay.
So
hilarious.
Yeah. So obviously, he's a big fan of Carrier. It probably unnerved him quite a bit hearing that. So now here we got to get down to history. What's happening on the ground? Because remember, John the Baptist was becoming very popular out there with the crowds. Right. And as a preventive measure, and what we have to understand from Antipas is his brother Archelaus was deposed. That they lost the province of Judea to Rome because their brother mismanaged another nationalistic or another national movement.
Right.
There wasn't millions of people, but it was the beginning of an uprising, and Archelaus lost the province of Judea. So Herod, when he saw John the Baptist and he's becoming popular, it's like, I'm just going to kill him right away. I can't have another uprising on my hands because, remember, Rome can come in and take Galilee because they will be blamed for it. And once again, this is at the height of Tiberius's climate of fear. So Herod would be very concerned about everything too. So think about it. Now you have Jesus coming along. They killed John the Baptist pretty quickly. So Josephus records on it that the motive for Antipas was, we can't have an uprising. this guy is a moral teacher, John the Baptist. He's promoting good virtues. He's becoming popular with the crowds. I need to kill this guy and get it over with.
Mm-hmm.
Now here comes Jesus. He's becoming popular with the multitudes. He's spreading. And so what does Herod do? Remember, this is an important point because this is where I was trying to get Ehrman to understand. After October 18th, 31 AD, and it is going to be crucial because I'm going to be bringing up some points that the Gospels seem to understand what's happening in Tiberius's administration. You know, there's a point where Pilate and Herod come together and make up because there was an event in 32 AD where they had a big fight over. But think about what I just made the point. Pilate would be compelled to quell any type of uprising, no matter how small or big. Whether, I mean, how many people were going up? We're talking about in 36 AD, there was a movement of Samaritans, another trickster that said, hey, I have there's holy artifacts of Moses up on our holy temple. Let's go up there. And now, even though they appeared armed, Pilate just looked at it as a large movement of people. What are they up to? Let me just go in there. And now Pilate lost his job over that. He's lucky Tiberius died before he got to Rome, but Pilate mismanaged. And Tiberius was real big. Don't mess up with because if you cause too much burdens for the people and they uprise, it's probably your fault. So Pilate had to deal with two things, and so did Herod. And this is why in the Gospels, when you see them kicking them back and forth, you deal with Jesus. You make the decision. What the Gospels perfectly put on display is that climate of fear with Tiberius that's happening. They don't want to be blamed for an uprising. Herod, Antipas doesn't want to lose his kingdom. And Pilate, he doesn't want any investigation into him because he was most likely appointed by Sergianus, the mortal enemy of Tiberius. So any investigation would open up in charges. He would probably be executed. So would his family. And we see this dynamic in the Gospels where Pilate and Herod are pushing him back and forth. But if you understand what's happening, that's what's sort of going on. But what I wanted to show is right after the resurrection, because remember, my points I built on, Derek, was this chain of evidence. Every time there's anything that looks, smell, remember, they did kill Jesus. And remember, Pilate, who he wanted to stay away from this as much as possible. One of the things, it'll come up a little bit later, but anytime anything that look and smell like an uprising, they're going to take care of it. However, at the same time, if you mismanage the whole situation, they could send an embassy against you to Tiberius, and there goes your job. And that's what happened in 36 AD with the Samaritans. The Samaritans sent a delegation to Tiberius, and the governor of Syria told Pilate, get to packing. You got to answer for what just happened when you mismanaged the event. And we see that in the Gospels. Now, the question I raise, because Dr. Carrier puts on, from a perspective of a historian, if this is true, if the disciples were going back to Galilee and then to Jerusalem and promoting this resurrection narrative, not only Pilate, but Herod, the Sanhedrin, everyone would have to get in front of it before Tiberius gets wind of it. But the question remains, why were the Christians allowed to spread this message?
Say that last sentence you just said.
So think about it. The disciples are going back to Galilee. They're promoting this narrative. Mm-hmm. They go back to Jerusalem 50 days later at Pentecost. You have all these pilgrimages.
It depends on which gospel we're reading, because Luke doesn't have them go back to Galilee. But okay, but complete your thought though, just so I'm.
Yeah. So, well, you have this movement. Christianity does explode. We have this movement of Christianity. The apostles, and I'm going to go into this in a little point. The apostles are set up in Jerusalem. They're barking orders. They're running their Christian ministry campaign. Why isn't Herod or Pilate squashing the whole thing like they did with the Galilean worshipers, like or Herod or Antipas did with John the Baptist? Why, in the aftermath of the resurrection, all of a sudden, the Christians are allowed to spread this message of the gospel? Remember, Jesus was convicted against treason of Rome. So now you have all the followers supporting someone. It would look like a rebellion to the empire. We just killed this guy who was their rebel leader, and now they're rallying behind him, saying he rose from the dead. It's looking like they're leading a rebellion.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So okay, there's a lot of things you said, and I don't want to interrupt you. Okay, I'm trying to be respectful here.
No.
Because you got to get your argument out, and I know in debates the frustration of not being able to really express and get into the weeds about what you put a lot of thought into this. I would first just raise the point that the Pilate we see in the Gospels doesn't seem to behave like the Pilate we read in Philo of Alexandria and Josephus. And I know this is a critique you are well aware of, that critics say Pilate's not that nice guy who would wash his hands. Okay. He would have done the dirty deed. As Josephus says, he committed this, what ended up becoming an illegal act. Okay. What happened is the argument was put forward that these were not just some violent people. They were doing a religious act at Gerizim. So they weren't like going up there to do something insane, was the critique from the people who were blaming Pilate. Pilate was seeing this as like too large of a crowd coming here to this place. Something's wrong. Let's squash them. Whereas his opponent in Josephus is kind of trying to indicate like, hey, they were doing religious stuff. You literally like just stepped in on them doing religious stuff. And of course, that's when he gets removed from his post. And we don't hear ever again from Pilate after that. That is, we know what happened to this guy. If he comes before the emperor, and this specific emperor, we know likely that dude's done for. The other thing, and I was writing this down, was Herod in the Gospels. You bring up an interesting observation that Steve Mason, remember now we're approaching things differently, okay? But I think we could, if you walked through the data with me, I think there's unless your faith commitments override what I think the evidence could point to for you, I think you'd be persuaded because you're an empiricist thinker. You're thinking about what's the data say, what's the text say, and this doesn't destroy faith, by the way, just so you know. I'm not trying to make you not believe. You know that. But I'm saying there are Christian liberal scholars who realize, okay, Luke Acts is later than I thought. And the fact that the only gospel that has this Antipas / Pilate, kicking Jesus back and forth stuff is Luke. And Steve Mason highlights that when you all the data he brings from Judas the Galilean, the chronology's all messed up in Luke Acts. I even found something that Steve Mason never found. I went into the Greek actually and found something interesting in how he identifies the lake Tiberias. There's Thalisi and there's Limne. Limne is the lake, and Thalisi is the sea. Mark, Matthew, and John call that body of water we call the Sea of Galilee, which is Lake Tiberias. They call it a Thalisi, or a sea. And it's right there at the land of the Gerasenes. In Luke, it's called a Limne. It's a lake. And so I highlighted this to Steve Mason. We've had several conversations on the phone, and I'm like, what do you think about that? If you add all the other data you've already brought in that shows that Josephus is being used by Luke Acts, what do you think about the fact that Luke, I think I got a popcorn kernel in my throat. 1 second.
No problem.
What do you think about the fact that Luke breaks the tradition and brings in a lake? And guess who else calls it a Limne? And they call it a Limne of Tiberias, right? Josephus. And so I found linguistic data that I think supports my position, but he argues that there's a reason, because there's an interplay in Josephus between Antipas and Pilate. And there's a reason why Luke would have done this, because of Josephus, where you don't get it in Mark and you don't get it in Matthew and you don't get it in John. So there's that. Again, the other problem I have, and I'm just saying this because it's an absence of evidence. All right. It doesn't prove it didn't exist. It doesn't prove that there wasn't something that was there that was written down. But again, I imagine if the empire had some information and Josephus is documenting, he was the chief historian of this area. In fact, he was so important of a historian, according to Steve Mason, who's an expert on Josephus. And of course, he's well aware of the Roman period and Roman material and Tacitus and Suetonius, and that they relied on him. Tacitus and Suetonius were dependent upon Josephus for anything happening in the Levant. That region was his. He was the expert on that region. The fact that I don't find any narration of that data that I wish we had, okay, to really get closer to it. I'm sure you wish you had it too. That causes me. You see what I'm saying? That makes me go, why doesn't he know about all of this concrete pilot reportage material that you would think he would, especially if he is in the empire's house? He has the name literally of the emperor in his name. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and this is why I bring up Josephus in the beginning. Why isn't he reporting that this is all fake news? Under the Flavians, it would have served him well at the court. You know, he's obviously doesn't want to do anything to embarrass the emperor. But I think when we go into the next point, it will address some of the questions that we have about Pilate. So if we want to go into that.
Sorry, I rambled there. Solera Knight, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. How hypostatic union type God, not pagan concept?
Well, and we know, well, not pagan concept.
Yeah.
Now I could go into a whole thing, the true myth that they talk about, but obviously this is a long involved. Were there ideas out there that are similar to Christianity? Yes, but as a general theme, the spirit becoming God, the dualist nature, there was, even in Christian circles, that was a hard concept to break with. The dualic nature, the body is the sepulcher of the soul. They were trying not to mix it. That's the point of Plutarch's Life of Romulus, is that it doesn't bode well with our philosophy on this. But I could talk more on that. I do want to get into the next point.
Yeah. It's just a super chat. And Solera, I would just say look into Neoplatonism, of course, and maybe you're already identifying some of that. There's a lot of philosophy that gets adopted and recycled and stuff. And I think even with that idea, I know a lot of Christians who don't find that as like something that harms their concept of God or falsifies it or anything. And real quick, I just want to make a comment here to really, my friend, you haven't watched my channel enough. Gad Barnea, Jonathan Adler, Jacob L. Wright, several academics. I don't know where you're coming from with this, but of course there are no. Oh, you're saying Hebrew scriptures prior to Greek Septuagint. Oh, never mind. Seems like you're coming from like a Ammonite type of background. All right, continuing where you left off.
Yeah, I'll tell you where to stop, but it'll be good.
Okay, 2343. Yell at me. I'm here.
Okay,
and I'm taking notes. I mean, look, I want to like honestly, give pushback, but also really understand you, because I don't really hear many Christians do this, what you're doing. So this is cool. All right.
50 days after the purported resurrection of Jesus, Acts reports that the disciples mobilized the movement and spread the resurrection narrative among the masses in Jerusalem, swelling its ranks by 3,000 on Pentecost, thereby setting the stage for a rapid, widespread expansion. As Paul noted, the early church's leadership was anchored in Jerusalem, with the apostles directing operations from there. And central to early Christians' proclamation was the empty tomb. The consistent, multifaceted documentary evidence spanning Christian, Gnostic, Jewish, Greek, Syrian, and Roman sources supports the empty tomb, and there is no documentary evidence to the contrary. While I acknowledge Dr. Ehrman's challenge to the traditional burial narrative, his portrayal of Pilate and the Roman policy in Judea is undermined by two major oversights. Firstly,
you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Keep going. Sorry. There was an Amber Alert that kicked off. Sorry about that.
I want to make sure I heard you right here. Let me back that up just a second real quick.
Acknowledge Dr. Ehrman's challenge to the traditional burial narrative. His portrayal of Pilate and the Roman policy in Judea is undermined by two major oversights. Firstly, Ehrman fails to incorporate the critical shift in imperial policy towards the Jews that followed the execution of Sejanus in 31 AD. Sejanus was not only extremely hostile to the Jews, but also spread several false accusations against them. Following Sejanus' execution, Tiberius sent an executive order to all provincial governors to cease harassing the Jews, but instead comfort them and respect their ancestral customs, treating their local laws as a mandated trust committed to their care to ensure their commitment to peace and stability in the provinces. Furthermore, in the wake of the Gilded Shield protests, Tiberius established a clear precedent for Pilate post Sejanus' fall by explicitly forbidding the violation of Jewish national customs and laws as recorded by Philo. Tiberius was incensed by Pilate's audacious brief for Jewish religious law. The emperor issued a sharp rebuke demanding the immediate removal of the shields. Consequently, to appease local Jewish law and secure his standing with the emperor, Pilate began to show greater deference to Jewish traditions, fearing that another embassy to Rome might jeopardize his position or lead to his execution. This directly explains Pilate's change of heart and actions during Jesus' trial, where he yielded to the Jewish leaders' blackmail. If you let this man go, you are not Jesus' friend. All in all, this is the Big Bang of Christianity, ignited by the singularity of the resurrection, which Tacitus describes as the outbreak of destructive superstition originating in Judea and then spreading to Rome. This establishes that the factual circumstances on the ground. Okay. So I do want to talk about there because I do see a lot of comments in there where people are like, no, Pilate was so mean. So this is where history is so important to put things into context. It's not that Pilate was so mean. Remember what I said before when Tiberius took up a strategic position, because obviously the way he grew up, he wanted to get out of Rome, all the politics. I'm going to take up a strategic position in Capri. I have this guy that saved me in a cave, Sejanus, who became his Praetorian Guard in charge of everything. I'm going to have him set up in Rome to run everything. Now, what we know from Philo and from Eusebius is that Sejanus had an anti-Semitic agenda. Now, he could have done it for a lot of different reasons to gain support in the empire. Remember, his goal was to take down Tiberius and run the empire. Now, what's important to understand is, Pilate was a mean, there was Jewish laws, or there was a Judean treaty going back for the Jews to preserve their ancestral laws in their ancestral hometown, going all the way back to Julius Caesar. Now, Pilate, it is interesting that he did a number of these events. He took some funds from the treasury that was for the Jews. They had the Gilded Shield incidents that Pilate talks about. And then he minted some coins with some Gentile inscriptions, all in violation of the Jewish laws. And while Ehrman does argue that, Philo talks about this really mean, he seems to have no sensitivity to the Jews. What he's not asking, and I think what some of the audience members aren't asking, why was Pilate so mean? And if you go to history, first we see from Philo, who's a contemporary of the period, is that Sejanus, Remember, Sejanus was executed October 31 AD. Okay, this is sort of that middle of the time. So before that time, there was 3 incidents where it seems like Pilate is riling up the Jews. Well, why is he doing that? Why is he just going against their natural laws? For what? What's the purpose? Well, if Sejanus is running Rome and he's about to take Tiberius out, obviously you're going to follow his orders, because what I think what some of the scholars, I have some names on here, Paul Miser, one of them, one of the areas that wasn't loyal to Sejanus, remember, he controlled all the garrisons and all the legions of Rome, except for the 4 legions of Syria. There was a governor that was real close friends with Tiberius. And if we take the anti-Jewish agenda of Sejanus, which is documented by Philo and Eusebius, and obviously if Pilate is appointed, it would explain why Pilate is so mean to the Jews early on, where he's trampling their laws. Because remember, if you have any type of uprising or the Jews start riling up, all Sejanus would have to do is say, hey, Tiberius, the Jews aren't behaving. Let's get rid of the governor of Syria, and I'll replace him with one of my people. And then once you have all 3 legions, you control and you take out Tiberius.
So now, just to stillman you properly, we're tracking so far, and I want you to continue, is, Pilate is now, he's in his power, net 26 CE. Yes. Sejanus gets executed, you're 31. He's 5 years later.
Yeah, 5 years later.
He commits all these anti-Jewish clear things, according to Philo. Josephus has some documentation too, but you're saying that once he realizes that Sejanus, who was hard on the Jews, is out of office, and Tiberius says, here's how things are going to go, respect their customs, respect them, you're now going to then make a shift in suggesting historically that the way that Pontius Pilate behaves after the execution of Sejanus causes him to then tiptoe around Jewish people and not trying to ruffle any feathers, so to speak. So when the gospel portrayal is contrary to the evidence we have from Philo of Alexandria about him, it's a simple historical catalyst that you would say is why he changed his behavior in the gospel versus what we find in external sources.
So think about what I posted up there. So remember, when Sejanus died, I think he was executed October 18th, 31 AD. So what I posted up there is from Philo's works. He talks about after Sejanus was executed, what happens then? Tiberius sends out an imperial decree to all the provincial governors that the Jews aren't to be touched. Sejanus was spreading all these false accusations against them. You need to honor their laws. And he says to comfort them. These are their laws. It's committed to their trust. And what he ends off there is he says, since the men were peaceful in their dispositions and the natural characters in their laws train them and dispose them to be quiet, he's basically saying, if you don't ruffle their feathers, let them observe their laws, they're not going to revolt and uprise. What happens after then? Then that's when you have to go to the Gilded Shields incident, because it is an interesting. Now, Paul Miser dates that incident to 32 AD. So think about it. Sejanus is just executed. What Philo is describing is, and it'll make sense with the Gospels. All of a sudden, Pilate dedicates some gilded shields. It's in the temple of Herod. And obviously it would be sacrilege because nothing could be dedicated except to God. So why would Pilate be dedicating shields? But at that time, to show loyalty to Tiberius, it's like, hey, Sejanus is executed. I want to show that I'm honoring you. I'm going to dedicate some shields. But when he does that, it caused a big uproar for the Jews. So what happens? Herod's sons come out. one of them being Antipas. And I think they date this to around the second Passover of Jesus. And this is where in Luke, where you see Pilate and Herod becoming friends again, because what happened at Gilded Shields? Pilate is probably freaking out right now because the Jews are ready to throw themselves on the line. And what Philo describes in there is that what they told Pilate, don't break the peace, don't cause a revolt or an uprising. Tiberius is desirous that none of our laws will be demolished. And so what they do is they send a letter to Tiberius. Now, remember, if Sejanus is still in office at that time, or they send an embassy to Rome, if Sejanus is still there, he would just send the Jews back. He wouldn't care because everything was routed through Sejanus in Rome. But this is where the Jews are taking a very tough posture towards Pilate. And they write to Tiberius. And this is where Tiberius was so angry with him that he wrote a letter approaching and reviling him in the most bitter manner for his act of unprecedented audacity and wickedness, and commanding him immediately to take down the shields and convey them away to the metropolitan of Judea to Caesarea. So remember, after this event, all of a sudden, Pilate's on his best behavior. And this explains why Luke has Herod and Pilate becoming friends again, because Antipas was there at the event. What Philo reports is his 4 sons came out with him being one of them. And this is where they got into the big fight with Pilate, and they wrote to Tiberius. And remember, Pilate is trying to get away from any association with Sejanus. There's treason trials going on. After that letter from the emperor, are you ever going to cross him again?
Yeah, so you're not just saying Sejanus is the pivotal moment. You're saying that him not taking down the shields, and then the letter comes from the emperor. Mind you, this is like late 31 CE, so you have to have a crucifixion after that.
Yeah. So
you have to have it in 33. You can't have it in 30. Some dated in 30, some dated in 31. So it would be problematic if the crucifixion, according to history, happened in 30 or 31. Just because this wouldn't work. You'd have to have it later. You see what I'm saying? In order for your model to make sense for history, to try and make Pilate match that idea, you see what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, but I think the Gospels convey that, because there's a point in there where it shows how would that person really know about it? Think about it. If it's Luke, it sort of makes sense where he's conveying a pivotal moment where Herod's sons came out and challenged Pilate. They had a lot of clout. And remember, you can only do that after Sejanus' death. Before that, it'd be meaningless, because any embassy you sent to Rome, you're sending to Sejanus, and Sejanus would just dismiss the delegation because you'd have no power. Once Sejanus is dead, you appeal to Tiberius, especially in light of that first executive order that he sent out to all them. Yeah. It would explain why Pilate is dedicating something to Tiberius, because he wants to get on his good side. Go ahead.
My criticism, and I still hold a criticism here, is that I feel like when you're reading the Gospels as like these must be history, right? We need to trust that these are history. Then that's a clever, in my opinion, that's a clever move to try and make sense of Pontius Pilate in light of the data that you're looking at from Sejanus and the whole shields thing. I think that's actually very clever, even though I still don't buy it completely. And the reason I don't buy it completely is because of Pilate's later actions. I mean, Pilate literally goes out of his way and slaughters an entire massive religious group of Samaritans, and he ends up paying the consequence for that too. So it's not like Pilate's behavior changed all of a sudden.
The Samaritans weren't the Jews. They didn't have the same. Didn't have the same Judean treaties. Remember, what would scare them about the Jews is their influence. They've already have a precedent with Pilate. And remember, the Samaritans are different. They don't have that same Judean treaty that the Jews have. They have something very, they have a documented treaty with Rome to observe their laws in ways that other citizens throughout the Roman Empire did not enjoy. They didn't enjoy Sabbath laws and all these things. That's why, when Ehrman, this is why I'm saying when Ehrman approaches, if a member of the Sanhedrin approached, Pilate at that time and said, we want to bury the criminal Jesus. If he acted against their national laws, which is their burial tradition, he would risk infuriating the emperor or getting a number embassy, and he wouldn't do that against Tiberius. It's just, but I think the point that I'm also trying to make is now all of a sudden the Christians are promoting this doctrine in this event. And why aren't they being attacked and killed? The apostles are setting up headquarters. It's like Christian Central. Let me start. Yeah. And this is one of the main points I make. All of a sudden, with all this information, why isn't Pilate or Herod acting? Because Tiberius has spies. He was paying people in the emperor to dig up dirt or rumors or anything. Can you imagine this getting back to Tiberius? Hey, the criminal that was just committed treason against the throne, they're just promoting he rose from the dead. The Jews are saying that the disciples stole the body. It'd be like, Tiberius, what are you doing? You're causing an uprising. You're dead now. So the question is, why isn't Pilate now? If everyone, and I see a lot of the comments in the chat, if you talk about how horrible Pilate was, and he was, don't get me wrong, he's still going to do his duty. Well, why isn't he killing the Christians now? At this pivotal moment where they're spreading the movement, they're rallying behind a crucified guy who was accused of treason against the throne and disturbing the peace. Now they're promoting this big event at Shavuot or Pentecost. They're riling up, they're getting members. The apostles are just sitting back in Jerusalem. I don't know why you'd want to go back to Jerusalem. Your rebel leader just got killed. Yeah, you'd want to hide back in Galilee. But now you go all the way back to Jerusalem. You're promoting this narrative, and Pilate's not doing anything. Where's this mean, nasty guy that who's killing everyone?
That's
and
assuming,
Herod too.
But that is assuming that Acts is portraying history. That is assuming these texts are actually portraying what happened. And most of the scholars, especially the critical ones, take a theological or a literary approach in explaining the behaviors, the words of Pilate. There's even problems I have with Pilate. For example, I did a documentary. I think you might have seen it. I don't know. Where I call it's about the omniscient narrator. Like, how did anyone, none of the apostles around, there's no disciples around. Now hear me out. We can make up something if we want to, but we need evidence. We can't just go, well, it's possible that this. And my question is, who was in the room with Pontius Pilate and Jesus during that conversation to write down what was actually said? Jesus dies. He doesn't have time to go, hey, Peter, I'm on the cross. Write this down. Pilate told me, last night, he said. So how did the information end up in the Gospels about these conversations? And there are a lot of literary questions I have on why I would say I don't think the behaviors of Pontius Pilate changed. I think this guy who had it's not like, I don't think he was just a puppet of a guy who was hating Jews, especially if Sejanus did what he did. And then he knows he's not a dummy. The writing's on the wall. Sejanus is killed and his sentiments toward Jews are that way. Finally, he gets the warning letter from the emperor himself. It's like, hey, don't do that again. Don't try to go out of your way to stir shit up. But he knows that if he doesn't stop uprisings, his head's gone either way. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. And if Jesus enters into the Jerusalem temple and flips over money changers and starts causing a ruckus and whipping people, he's going to be he's going to have to do what he's got to do.
Well, you know, and but think about it.
Oh.
Caiaphas and the high priest and all of them were pushing to get Jesus executed. Herod just didn't want his hands dirty on that. So if anything transpires, you know, it could be blamed on Pilate. But the fact of the matter is, we do have to talk about the facts on the ground. Whether the
that's why I asked you, who was in that room? How do you explain the gospel author ascertaining that insight when no one was there but Jesus and Pontius Pilate?
You had his accusers there, so there was other people there.
Not in Pontius Pilate's in his private quarters
when he sent back.
What is truth? These things. I mean, there were accusers when there was the kangaroo trial with the Jews, but I'm talking about with Pilate when he's speaking to him in private and he's asking him, "What is truth? Are you a king?" These questions. Who's there to write that down? We don't know. We have no way of knowing. That's part of why I take the literary approach. You see what I'm saying? And saying, when you're writing a story about something, this is what you would do.
Well, yeah. I mean, Josephus had a lot of information. John the Baptist, you know, the capture, the execution. There's an idea that there is history going on, but even absent that point, because I obviously go into a lot in there. The fact is, Christianity did grow.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So what Tacitus is describing about this origin of the evil that erupted in Jerusalem, that would be consistent with what Acts is saying. But
you could, by the time Acts is writing, if you take the critical scholarly approach, of course Christianity is growing. All you have to do is retrofit your story back here into the 30s, and you don't need to necessarily. I mean, you've got a growing movement that's still alive, and in fact, it works out really well when Gamaliel makes the quote, "Listen, they haven't gone extinct." Even in Acts, there's so many historical problems, like even the Theudas stuff, right? When did Theudas do what he did? Historically, in the 40s, 44, precisely 44 AD. Not only does he get Judas the Galilean backwards historically and claims that Judas was the first one. Judas was after Theudas, he argues. In the mouth of Gamaliel in Acts, he gets the chronology wrong. If you just read Josephus, you'll see why he does that. But either way, Theudas dies in 44. Gamaliel's giving this speech before Theudas ever gets killed. How does Gamaliel know about Theudas's death in 44 when he's speaking supposedly by Acts chronology in the late 30s, or roughly a few years after Jesus' death? It makes no chronological sense. This is why I'm saying literary. There's something that's going back.
But the facts on the ground that the Christian movement did grow. I mean, Paul is speaking that the apostles were based out of Jerusalem. We're talking about all these churches that Paul is writing to. The movement obviously grew between the 30s and the 50s.
Of
during
course.
Paul. So,
I'm not denying that.
So why isn't the empire taking any action against it? Why doesn't, from when Christ dies to when Pilate is removed from office, why isn't that movement dissipated? They're growing.
Right. Well, I don't know how much they're growing. There's no telling how much they're growing.
Just to give you perspective, how many people went up to Mount Gerizim? How many Galilean worshipers were there? We're not talking about millions. We're talking about these small groups. But Rome perceived even those small groups as a threat. The Bacchus conspiracy, there was 7,000 involved in it that Levy promotes. We're not talking about large groups.
Well, that's actually way larger than the estimates I have. John Kloppenborg, who wrote Christ Associations, he does a heuristic study of other cults in the first century that we have actual data for. Because Paul doesn't tell us how many members are in his churches, okay? But he does know how many members were part of the Samothracian and the Dionysian Bacchus and the Orphic, and we have regional, actual numerological examples of cults in those regions, and he uses a heuristic approach to try and identify house churches, how many were there. The other thing is, are they really standing up like Paul at the Areopagus going, hey, everybody, become a Christian? Or is that more like a Socratic rewrite of Paul to look like the famous philosopher Socrates, who went to the same spot historically, stood in the same spot, gave his message? And of course, there's also another story by, what's his name? It's Euryclea. No, not Euryclea. It's the daughter of Agamemnon and Agamemnon's son and daughter, Iphigenia and Orestes.
Yes.
In that play, Orestes in...
It's a great play.
I can't remember the name of the... Yeah, I can't remember the exact place, but I know that in that older play by Euripides, guess what the conversation is at the very location that Paul's at in Acts 17? The discussion of the resurrection comes up. This is 400 years before Acts, at least 400. And in that discussion, he says the gods, which are on trial for Orestes murdering his mother because his mother killed his father, in revenge for that, he kills her and he has blood guilt on his hands. They say the resurrection it cannot happen, right? When a man dies and goes into the dust, and the word anastasis comes up in that Greek, there are scholars who identify that this is a reversal of that play. It is literally doing a literary repeat, making Paul, it's powerful storytelling. That's how I'm approaching this material. So I know I keep doing that and you go, but yeah, dude, but there's still a movement and it's still growing. Well, it's like, they could be hiding. They could be
from
not
the Roman
very
Empire? Big. I mean, even if they...
Do you think that the Bacchus cult went extinct because they laid laws down in 186 BCE?
No. The thing is,
they continue to grow.
They arrested them and they executed a ton. So
and
the question
they still
is,
thrived.
Well, but we don't see that initial action, except the report would explain it. So let's go into the rest of the video.
Okay.
Because this will...
You see what like, you understand that just because they killed 7,000 didn't stop the Bacchus cult from growing.
No, but my question would be, we do have records that they went after all those people. Where is that for Christianity in the very beginning?
Where's the records for what?
Where's that initial action to arrest or execute any of those? Where's Herod or Pilate's action, even in the initial point where they're preaching even to 100 or 200 people? You would still take them out in the Roman Empire.
Yeah,
that would look like an uprising. But let's go through the rest, and then we can go through that.
Yeah. We got a super chat real quick. Perfect timing for the super chat too. By the way, Nicole, so rich. Thank you so much for the super chat. Go, Derek. You need to debate Wes Huff. Just saw a podcast he was on, and he still believes in Adam and Eve. Haha, good work. Well done. Thank you, Nicole. It's weird your super chat, isn't it, Jonathan, that this super chat came up? You could tell him why. If you want to. You want to tell them why that's a weird super chat?
Well, yeah, because Derek already has a response video out to Wes Huss on some recent comments that he made, which should be coming out. Derek actually just recorded that right before we went live. So that script has already been written, and that's going to be out. I would love to see that debate. I think Derek is really great. You do a great job in that debate.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Hey, look, thank you for the super chat. And yes, I have a video from the Diary of the CEO interview. My gosh, he doesn't want to talk to me. He doesn't want to talk to me or Neil. The guys ignored us from day one, is what it is. But he made some boo-boos on that episode. And then also just some crazy stuff I got to call him out on. I just got to, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? All right, back to the show. Seriously, thank you, Nicole. You have immortality just for that. Okay, continuing. Where do we want to go to? We're at 2632.
We'll go to the end.
All right.
Now we're present here. Previously stated, Tiberius.
Say that again?
Yeah, and then we could go through Bart Ehrman's comments. You know, where he,
Yeah, the famous moment.
Yeah, the famous. Pilate and Antipas maintained steadfast policies of suppressing uprisings and other civil disturbances. However, neither Pilate nor Herod took any action to arrest, imprison, or execute those involved in rallying support for a figure perceived as a rebel and threat to the state, nor did they suppress the movement operating within their jurisdictions, thereby allowing the gospel to spread.
That was your point. That was your point. I get it. I get it. Okay, got it.
Once again, what explains this fact? Regarding this fact is best explained by the conclusion that Pilate confirmed the resurrection of Jesus, and that information was forwarded to Tiberius, a conclusion reinforced by the accounts of Justin and Tertullian. Regarding that testimony, Eusebius reports that Pontius Pilate, in accordance with the ancient custom of reporting novel occurrences to the emperor, informed Tiberius of reports circulating throughout Israel about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Pilate also recounted other wonders he had learned of Jesus, and how after his death, he had risen from the dead and was now believed by many to be a god. Tiberius brought the matter before the Senate to have Jesus ranked among the gods of Rome. Although the Senate refused, Tiberius contrived no hostilities against Christians. The report holds up in several key respects. First, according to Tacitus, Tiberius allowed the Senate to weigh in on provincial petitions. Such petitions would grant Christians legal status and authorize the construction of temples for worship. Second, given Tiberius's well-documented fiscal discipline, it is highly unlikely he would pressure the Senate to authorize expenditures for Christians following their refusal. Lastly, neither Tiberius nor Pilate initiated any hostile actions against Christians. In conclusion, a cumulative analysis of this evening's data, supported by the positive evidence in the Gospels, Acts, and Pauline's epistles, indicates that the physical resurrection of Jesus represents the most historically robust explanation. Not only does the evidence weigh strongly in this direction, but it also best explains the origins of Christianity, a task that the post-Enlightenment scholarship has become powerless to explain, according to Nikolai Berthier. And just as the law of physics do not hold at the Big Bang, evidence indicates that the resurrection of Jesus is another such singularity, exemplifying this exception.
2 minutes.
Ultimately, a historian's task in explaining the events in Judea is to follow the evidence wherever it leads, rigorously testing those leads and abandoning those invalidated by rebuttal evidence. However, this role does not include forcing irrational explanations or dismissing evidence to avoid confronting an observable black swan within the naturalistic worldview. Thank you, Dr. Ehrman, for taking time to hear my thesis. And thank you again, Dr. Stephen Boyce, for hosting this debate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to bring Dr. Ehrman on. I'll also bring on your slides as well, Dr. Ehrman, and you will have the same courtesy. You'll have 25 minutes. You can use all or most of that, as much as you want, and I will not start the clock until you start your presentation. Oh, you might be muted. Make sure we're not muted here. Nope, still muted. Let me see if I can unmute your mic. Nope, I can't.
Here we go.
My end.
Here we go.
There
okay,
we
go. Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I just before I start, I just want to say that was.
Sure.
I think that was the most remarkable argument for the resurrection I've ever heard.
Wow.
I didn't understand a lot of it, so I'm looking forward to the cross-examination.
Look. That's what we clipped. That's what we played in the commercial. Look, if I heard this, I'd be like, I've never heard. I mean, maybe that's what he means by remarkable, is that it was definitely different. Not necessarily that it was like, oh my God, this is an impenetrable argument or something, but like maybe he was impressed by the simple fact that you went down that route of trying to go to the Acts of Pilate and trying to get it anchored to the first century. What are your interpretations of what Bart's words are from your view?
Yeah, and obviously I do get confirmation of these things outside of that. obviously there's 2 points. He meant it as a compliment in the sense this is a well-researched, documented thesis that I'm putting. You know, you don't have to agree with all the points, and as Dr. Ehrman goes into, he doesn't agree with one of the points. But what he doesn't say, this is a nonsensical argument. This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know, this is different but stupid. He doesn't. He understood a lot of the main points that was being said. What he was pointing out was this is well researched. This is a really great argument. Yeah, it obviously has more novel concepts to it, but this is a well executed argument that. Right. Obviously, he doesn't agree, and he did challenge me on some point, but he knows it's well researched. You know, and I think this is the thing. You know, I know Dr. Richard Carrier recently wrote an article on his blog where, you know, he praised that, you know, Jonathan does a well executed argument. Now, I won't agree with it, and I think it's wrong on many different ways, but he could definitely compliment that. This isn't the silliness and all the other crazy stuff that we hear. This is a well-articulated argument. It has a number of plausible points, even though that he would disagree with a lot of them. This is an academic approach. This is an intellectual approach that you bring into the resurrection, and I have tremendous respect for that. And that was the vibe out there. This is well executed, well argued. You have a lot of ancient sources that are backing it up. Yes, he's not going to agree with much, but what it wasn't was a nonsensical, I'm going to laugh at this. This is garbage. No,
got it.
This was a well executed.
He did say, and the only where I stopped was her, and I literally stopped and had no further because I wanted to save this for you know, you and I. And we might need to do a part 2. I really honestly think with 2.5 hours in, right? And I know you got in the morning than I do. I'm thinking, my goodness, we should go through Bart's argument together and then let you, of course, like we did with this one, you get the first hit. Then I can tell you what I agree with, or maybe you know, like we can go from there. Real quick, S Mill still, thank you for the super chat. This is a good question. I was reading it before we brought it up. If Christians were seen as Jews, wouldn't Pilate and Herod tiptoe around them as well? No evidence Jews were fighting with Christians except New Testament.
Well, remember, they are Jews at this point in the sense that, so remember, prior to the aftermath of the crucifixion, that's why you see this kind of tiptoeing. Obviously, Jesus, they're following him around. You know, the Pharisees are warning him that Herod wants to kill him. They sent spies. Luke has spies. And this is normal. It's not what we're reading in here is like, why would they send spies? This is the Roman Empire. They're watching everything. How did Pilate know about these Samaritans going up to their holy mountain? They have spies. They're reporting back. And
but there was a mass crowd. I mean,
but how did he know about that in the age of no internet?
Because someone informed him. But my point is like there's a large crowd gathering, right?
And there's large crowds following Jesus. This is why they wanted him executed. Pilate
and he did get executed, but so did John the Baptist. And what I'm getting at is that when you go to Acts, though, and you're saying, well, there's large crowds of Christians running around and no execution happens, we should question historically if that happened, especially if we saw, like, if let's say a person tells you a lie 9 times, but then they come and say, I swear this time. It's the 10th time. You kind of go, okay, the pattern is they're a liar and they're not going to tell you the truth. So and I'm using that as just a bad analogy to point out, if they kept extinguishing groups that were public, there were any gathering of hundreds, let's say, when Acts shows up and there's hundreds, red flag if they aren't executed. According to what you're saying, they should have. There's no reason they shouldn't have.
I mean, and the point I want to say is, you know, Christianity didn't just the movement explains. You know, when think about it, we have all these. It was exploding all over Pliny's area. obviously Tacitus is writing about the eruption in Judea and the spread to Rome, and that's pretty quick. Think about how far the movement goes, and we even have evidence from Suetonius that indicates when Christianity arrived to Rome, because then all of a sudden the Jews were getting real upset with the preaching of Crestus, and then he just expelled.
Yeah, but even that's disputed. The Crestus thing.
Yeah, no, it's just, but if you look at everything together, it sort of makes sense.
If you take that data as Christ being the one,
I mean, who else would the Jews be so upset about?
Well, there were several messianic figures. There were several messianic claimants.
But would it be
and by the way, it says Crestus was in Rome. Not that they're preaching Crestus in Rome, but the text, if you go back to the primary source, Crestus is in Rome. So when did Jesus Christ go to Rome? There's no evidence he was in Rome. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, obviously there's a church by 65 AD. Nero is executing a large number of Christians. So they obviously were on the emperor's radar. They had to be a big group to cast blame on them. And so the point is, and think about it, Tertullian makes this report too, that because Tiberius contrived no hostilities against them, and we don't see anything up until, for the most part, Nero. But it would explain, if they verified the incident, Christianities would get this free reign. And this is the thing that we do have to explain. Christianity just didn't start out with 2 and then take over half of the Roman. And I know this took a long while to happen, but that's because the movement was continuing to grow. It wasn't checked. And with everything that they tried to do to stop it, it still took over. So it would make the most sense that, hey, after the crucifixion, whether you believe the resurrection story or not, the disciples were promoting it. Remember, Paul went to Jerusalem to meet with the disciples. So they're setting up shop and they're allowed to do that. I mean,
yeah, from my understanding, and of course, this is coming from the critical scholars, and this is still in the vein of S. Mill here. Steve Mason, I've had long conversations with him and, of course, interviewed with him. And he's all about Josephus, but also Rome, how Rome functioned and operated. He said Rome didn't care what people believed. They did not care. They didn't care that you had a belief in a resurrected person or that you believed in a superstition. What they cared about was social order. And
this
that
would
you're not.
Be, and this is to Carrier's point that he brings up. If the Christians or if the disciples were preaching that Jesus had rose from the dead, and it would look like a rebellion to Rome, just like John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. It's very similar. So what they're rallying behind someone that just got committed treason. You're associating yourself with someone that Rome executed. So right. They're rallying behind that movement. Why aren't they killed right away?
That's why Paul calls it a stumbling block to the Jews. Jews weren't buying it. They weren't into a Messiah that was, killed in such a fashion. Most of them, at least. It seems that he would have probably been turned away by most Jews who were like, no, we're not listening to that. But and that's probably why Romans has him saying, look, there's a mission to the Gentiles, and then eventually all Jews or all Israel will be saved. Again, S. Mill's question was still a powerful one, I think, in terms of Christians were Jews at this time. And eventually became dominated by Gentiles, and the divide between a Jew and Gentile is a late first century development, early second century for sure. And of course, I would just again, we're going to fundamentally disagree on Acts, because Acts, this to me is at least 90. I have to give at least Josephus a few years. I mean, he published this in 93, 94. I see I'm not sure if it's terminus antiquem or quo. I see that the earliest possible date that Luke Acts would be written is at least 94. That's 1 year after Josephus. That's why the scholars just go, late 1st, early 2nd century for Acts. And you would definitely not agree with that. And I would just say, well, then you're going to be forced, if you go earlier, if you dismiss the whole Josephus stuff, you're going to be forced into a pickle, though, when I bring up Theudas, because Gamaliel knows about the death of a guy, and Gamaliel's speaking in the 30s. He knows about a death of a cult leader named Theudas, who led a whole group to the Jordan River, claiming he was going to split the Jordan River in 44. How did Judas the Galilean in the 30s know about the death of a guy in 44? Unless Acts is written after 44, at least after 44.
Oh no, I agree that Acts is written after 44.
It gets the facts here a little goofy, because how could Gamaliel say that? It's in Gamaliel's voice in Acts that he says that there was a man named Theudas. He led him to the Jordan River and deceived many. How does he know about something that hasn't happened yet if he's saying this in the 30s in Acts? Do you see where I'm like the trouble?
No, I get all those points, and obviously, we could debate back and forth.
We will
on these. But I would say, to the point, we do have to explain the movement to Christianity. It did grow. We do have the fact that they were not touched by Tiberius or Pilate, and given their history, what's the probability that a movement rallying behind? I mean, think about probability. They took everyone else out. John the Baptist. They did kill Jesus. He was
They didn't kill John the Baptist's followers, though. They separated him from his followers, killed him, and as far as we know, we have no historical data in Josephus that his followers were killed.
No, we don't have.
And the Mandeans are still alive today. The Mandeans,
they're very small group, but they're not what the Christians are.
No, but the Christians weren't large till 2nd century. I mean, unless you grant, again, we're getting back to Acts, the only evidence you have that there's a somewhat pretty decent sized Christian movement is Acts. And to me, it's a proto-Catholicizing, romanticized historical fiction. That's what I'm saying.
It's also Paul going to the apostles in Jerusalem. They're setting up shop. They're running operations. They're setting up church. The churches didn't exist.
We should do a debate on Acts, Luke Acts, because you and I, like this, there's so much data in Acts that I would look at Paul's letters and go, these contradict to me. The letters of Paul and Acts, there's so many issues that we could get into and interesting things that you think. And you know me, dude, I'm not here to punch on you like that, but arguments. You know what I'm saying?
But I got a question for you.
Yeah.
You got to hear the whole thing with some commentary.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on the approach? What are you, apart from Ehrman's comments, what are your thoughts, given all the debates you've seen on the resurrection? What are your thoughts?
I like it. Okay. I actually do like what you're trying to do. I'm a skeptic, and even one commenter said Derek's too skeptical. Okay. And my brother-in-law said that to me, and he's big into aliens, love them to death. Right. And he says, no, their aliens are messing with us. They're in our atmosphere. Real quick side trail to give you to conclude with my comment on this is that when he did that, one day I tricked him, and I had a picture I found on social media that I was tricked by, and the post said, look, this UFO unidentified object was following me home. And it had me going, what is that? I'm looking, all squinting my eyes, trying to see what this thing is on the windshield of their car. It looked like it was just in the sky, but come to find out it was bird poop. Right. So because my brother and my brother-in-law are so into aliens, I'm like, dude, guys, y'all were right. I'm too skeptical. And I let my guard down and let them beat up on me for like 5 minutes. And they're like, told you, man, aliens are definitely doing all these things to us and all that. Right. And I was like, look, man, I should have just listened to y'all. I mean, I'm sorry. My mind makes me be skeptical. So show them the picture. They're like, dude, that's really crazy. Finally 5 minutes go by and I go, guys, all right, I was tricking you. And they're like, what? And I'm like, why is it that this picture, and it's you, once I say the answer, it makes sense. I said, why didn't you think that was bird poop on a windshield when I said this thing followed me all the way home and all that. It's on my windshield. It's bird poop. And they laughed and they went, oh my God. And I said, now are you going to keep calling me a hyper skeptic? Like, I'm using the best critical thinking skills I know how to use, and I'm cautious. So here's my thing about your hypothesis. It's unique. It's authentic. It's something you are doing that I've not heard any apologist do. It brings up something we don't usually think about, Axopilot, which I find really interesting. You got me wanting to go down a rabbit trail now. For that alone, I'm thankful, okay? Because I'm curious to know, why did Justin Martyr say this? Where did this come from? Is there any deeper critical scholarship that has something to say about the Axopilot? And then what's up with the development? You mentioned a quote, and I didn't want to interrupt you, about Eusebius that goes a little further than just a name dropping over here in Justin Martyr and Tertullian, I believe you said it was. Yeah. Tertullian and Justin Martyr.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just okay.
So think about it. Eusebius is a court historian. He's writing for Constantine. Right. So Christians get state powered now. Constantine, hey, let's get a history out there. Eusebius dedicates it to Constantine. So he's gathering evidence, and he puts this report in from Tertullian. Remember, and Tertullian is widely read. Julian the Apostate would most likely have read Eusebius. And even though we have Cyril's comments,
I would imagine, yeah,
we don't get a response from the Emperor Julian saying that's full of shit. What Eusebius wrote.
I mean, it's kind of like,
well, if you're trying to exploit every weakness against Christianity, that's an obvious one that you would go after. Justin,
maybe,
but when
I had this problem with Steve Mason when I mentioned to him before too. I'm like, well, why doesn't I can't remember, why don't the earliest church fathers bring up the quote from Josephus about Jesus? Wouldn't you think if these apologists knew about this quotation, the Testimony in Flavianum, that they would have quoted him very early on? And you know what Steve's answer was? He said, it wasn't as significant as you honestly think it is. We think it's significant, but they didn't have, it wasn't really a big deal for them that this quote, it became a big deal later. I'm just saying that to say maybe, and I don't know. I haven't exhausted the sources.
And we don't know. But Eusebius, obviously, in reporting on the times, he's a court historian. So obviously he had access to a lot of records, and he's sort of verifying the information. He's like, it was customary for the provincial governors to report. It is fascinating because we have all these sequence of events. We have Maximinius, we have Tertullian and Justin. So it's not just one thing. So for my thesis, it would explain a lot of things, why Christianity was able to spread. It makes sense on a lot of fronts that,
I would like to add something to what you said too that I found interesting. I never heard it the way you painted it about Pontius Pilate. I find that clever. I say clever as in like, I'm still completely skeptical, of course, but it's interesting that, your argument to try and justify why the portrayal of Pontius Pilate, and mind you, there is pressure, right? So the gospel author is not just saying, oh, Pilate's just like, I'm not going to be mean to Jews. Maybe there is this implication is like, screw them until there's threats. And then when there's threats, it's like, remember that letter we got from the emperor? Don't do it. So I think it's interesting how you're doing that to try and build that case. That's credit to you, okay, for trying to do your best to like
make it plausible.
It's plausible, yeah.
It would fit with the history. Now
the problem disagree. Dissect the gospel for me. When I start picking the gospel apart, I've got issues. I have other questions that'll come up, but I'm just highlighting that one point to be like, okay, that's interesting. Maybe after he lets down the shields, and because the emperor says, "Off with your head, or else," and then maybe Jews said, "Hey, we know his weak spot, and
we have leverage now."
Right. We know that he doesn't want his head off, and he's supposed to be decent to us. We'll use that against you. And
that's what they do. Well, in the Gospels, in John, they said, if you don't execute him, if you release him, because remember, in the Gospel of John, it conveys that Pilate wanted to release Jesus. And then the Jews spoke out and said, you will not be the friend of Caesar, which is essentially, we're going to go to Tiberius on you. And all of a sudden, that leverage, regardless of what you think of John, that's the same thing that was communicated at Gilded Shields.
Right.
Same thing. They had the leverage. And that's the reminder that we could go to Tiberius on you and you're done.
Right. That's what I found. Okay, that was interesting. Never heard it that way. Tried, to have it painted that way. The other thing is Philo's got some interesting mock king material that I've actually heard some scholars try to suggest that Mark might know Philo's work. Okay.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So I know you're not into this kind of stuff, but I'm like, meaning if he knows it from a literary standpoint, you could see why, if he knows, which I don't know if he does or doesn't, but if Mark does, and there's a scholar who's made the case, not only does he know Philo, he knows Josephus. And that's Mark, by the way. That's not a consensus view. I just want to highlight it, that there's a mock king where a homeless man is mocked and dressed up in like a robe, like royal robes for the day, and they're all like, "Oh, king, you're the king." That may have actually inspired the Markan mockery of Jesus story in the gospel. And I don't know what to do with that, but it's worth noting that if he does know Philo's the one that mentions this particular shield scenario and all of this kind of stuff, then maybe he knows it and he's plugging in from a literary standpoint, making sense of their crying out to him. And you may not have history, you might have literary, but I'm not saying they're historical characters.
No, and Luke does kind of convey where Pilate and Antipas make up, which would say at that point there's a transition now, because now they're friends, because Antipas would have been there. He was one of Herod's sons, so he was at that event.
Yeah, the Luke thing, when you bring in Luke and Antipas, and that jumps me to Josephus in my brain, because I did a long documentary script that was actually crafted by Steve Mason, and I'm like so persuaded at this point of his argument. I can't even unsee it now. Like, I'm just so, when he goes through the historical claims here. The other thing, dude, I would love to see you actually have a conversation with Steve Mason, because Mason knows like Josephus so well, and the historical chronology of the dates, and who was ruling, who was prefect, who was, in Syria, who was in Jerusalem, which brother screwed up, what dates and years. He knows some of the issues chronologically with the New Testament material, but also knows Josephus's material. And it'd be cool to see you pitch this idea to him, because I'm sure he's read Philo. I'm sure he's aware of this, and say, hey, what do you think about this? Explaining Pilate through this lens. Do you think this is plausible?
Yeah. And so, and I would say you have to factor in Serjanus, because that changed everything. That was a pivotal point, and we know almost the exact date of when it happened. So there's a big transition, and I would say, and there's a number of modern scholars that make this. Paul Meiser is one of them that I quote. There's several recognized historians that make this connection between Serjanus and Pilate, and then the transition. It would make sense historically, given Tiberius's administration. I think what happens is Ehrman talks a lot about Pilate's policies. It's not Pilate's policies, it's Tiberius's policy. So it almost makes it look like Pilate is not a lone wolf. Tiberius had a very strict command to the provincial governors. I want my sheep shaved, not skinned. And he had a very tough approach on the provincial governors. If uprisings, he would blame them. He didn't keep them in office very long. So I think we have to factor that in. But hopefully you enjoyed it. I can't.
Yeah, I enjoy
channel so much for letting me kind of talk through my ideas.
Of course. Look, well, first of all, you're my friend, okay? And we've met in person, and you and your wife are wonderful people. You strip better than half the strippers I've ever met in my life. For those who don't know, we went to a funny show, and he got picked in the crowd to go on stage and had to do some crazy stuff at the show. It was funny. But no, me and Jonathan are actual friends, and he's a brother, and he's done. You did the cartoons for me, the intros, the outro. We don't agree here on this thing, but again, final say on this. It's different. It's unique. It's interesting. I'm thankful that you didn't give me the same 5 minimal facts argument bullshit. And I'm sorry, I hate this. You may not think it's bullshit, but I'm just saying I'm tired of hearing the same thing. At least you're attempting to do something else. And for that, I give you credit, man. So while I'm not persuaded and I have more questions than I have answers, because my skepticism isn't, I know this and therefore I don't. It's more like, I got more questions now, Jonathan. I got more like, okay, where's the axe of Pilate? How do we know? How did Justin Martyr even know this material? And if we can never find that stuff out, then I will have to end the day with saying I'm just not persuaded, because I just don't have any way to get behind the wall of history that we have lost. You know what I mean? So I don't know what to do with it. But yeah, final say from you, dude, because you did the debate. What do you think? How do you think you did? And we're gonna have to do something to continue this.
Because I know there's so much material. I think this is, now if you think about it, I've debated Dr. Richard Carrier on a form of this thesis, which was an excellent debate. I think he has always been the toughest challenger. He's a historian. But at the same time, I've had the greatest discussions because he's able to really engage with the history. And we have fantastic conversations. You could go out to Dr. Carrier's blog and see them. They're excellent debates back and forth. I leave it to public opinion, but it started with Dr. Richard Carrier. Actually, I debated T-Jump on my original thesis. And then I reached out to Dr. Richard Carrier. I was like, I would love to have this debate with you. You can actually engage it and challenge me at the top of the level, And we had a really fantastic debate on this on his blog. And I did incorporate a form of this thesis with my debate with Tovia, Tovia Signer. So, and that was great. But I think this is probably the best presentation for my thesis on the resurrection I have ever set up. I think I've learned a lot from my debate with T-Jump, my debate with Dr. Richard Carrier, my debate with Tovia, and now presenting it to Dr. Ehrman. It is my best
attempt.
It's the best attempt for the thesis. And I think he's right when he says, this is the most remarkable. He knew it was well sourced. It was well argued. It wasn't dealing with the same usual garbage that we'll normally get.
Remarkable doesn't mean he thinks it's true. For those who, clearly and I like the comment we had here, novel, right? Venus Craig said a really cool one. I second that. Novelty is better than rehashing Isaiah 53 or the typical, minimal fact stuff. Like I respect that. And if I may comment about you as a person, apart from the argument, the other thing that I love about you is that you are really someone who's approachable. You're not out here to hurt or haha, and you're going to go around and like make 80 freaking clips to try and mock and scoff and things like that. And I think that's why you've had the opportunities you have. Your CV of debating PhDs is unlike any apologist in the world. You have debated people I don't think will ever have the chance to debate certain people. So take, for example, Robyn Faith Walsh. I told you on the phone the other day, I very much doubt she will ever debate another person in the world. Maybe offline when she bumps into someone, but like she's never going to have a formal debate with somebody. And we twisted her arm and she saw that you were such a good guy that she was willing to have a debate with you. You've debated Mark Goodacre. You've debated Bart Ehrman. You've debated Richard Carrier. You've debated, my goodness, who have I had you debate? All the PhDs. Josh Tabor, of course.
Kip Davis, Matthew Monger, Collins, John J. Collins.
That's right, bro. That'll never happen again.
No
one has ever debated him publicly, and you had the opportunity to actually engage. That's crazy, bro.
Yeah,
honestly.
Dr. Mark Goodacre. Yeah, it's been Bart Ehrman 3 times. I've debated him.
Golly, dude, that's crazy.
Yeah, Dr. Richard Carrier. I mean, yeah, I know we were talking about this, the resume of who I've had, but it go and remember even when we debated Kip Davis and Matthew Monger at the end of our opening, they were like, that was an academic approach. It was well sourced. It was an intelligent argument.
Who did you tag team with again?
That young lady that was part of that.
That's right. The apologetics. I can't remember, but yeah.
But remember the comments. This is an intellectual argument. I don't agree with it. I'm going to rebut it. But this is a fresh perspective. This is actually something I can engage with from an academic level. It's not a stupid argument. It's something that, hey, you're making a case. You may be all wrong, but you have a case to be made. It's plausible, but I'm going to disagree.
You're someone I would break bread with, is my point about you as a person. I mean, you're a stand-up guy, you know? You really are. Yep. Look, this guy just simply seems like a likable guy, and they were good arguments. So thank you for the positive compliments.
No, thank you. You know, and that's, you know, my goal, as Derek was saying, is to come out with my thesis, share it. This is the reasons why I believe. You know, once again, these are the reasons why I believe. I could be wrong. But I do appreciate all those comments.
Yeah, all the positivity. Sure, we're, you know, don't mind it too, Jonathan. Some of these people are really good people. They just sometimes we're doing this often ideas. And there's a time for that with certain people, and there's a time where there's some people like you who we can do this, we can debate, but like the energy gets matched when the other people bring in that more tense, not so friendly. Well, I can come out, I can do my thing. But with you, it's like, I don't want to do that. I'm more like, but Jonathan, you know, you know what I'm saying? But Jonathan, come on, bro. Like think about it. And you're going, well, listen, Derek, listen, look at your face, Derek. Listen, Derek. Oh man, I love you, man. I really do. And I love everybody who's joined us tonight. I hope you'll leave a comment, a like, go subscribe to Jonathan's YouTube channel. Let me share my screen. I'll put it in the chat right now. I ask everybody, please, if you've liked Jonathan here as a person, period, it means the world to me to show a friend some respect. And it's good that we have friends that aren't always necessarily thinking identical to us in every manner. But Jonathan goes way back. He created the cartoon you're going to see soon as we do our exit, the Matrix cartoon. Jonathan made that cartoon. For that very reason, I can't be too mean to my friend Jonathan. just for that reason alone, I mean, you've been nothing but great, man. So I want to let you have the final word.
No, final word. Thanks again for having me on. It's always a pleasure. Can't wait till we meet up again and break bread. But, most important, thanks for giving me an opportunity to kind of walk through my thesis with you.
I hope I wasn't too.
No, this was great. No, I was actually impressed of how well you were versed with the literature I was quoting.
Oh, good. Well, I'm hoping to get more versed. There's a lot you said that I don't know much about, and I do want to learn more about it. So you've at least inspired me to want to learn more, man.
Yeah, and I would tell everyone on the channel, go back and look at Tiberius's administration and look up about Serjanus. I think it's such a pivotal moment in the Roman Empire that it weighs in a lot. It starts to explain a lot of things on a number of fronts. So I would say just interesting. Definitely go look at who Serjanus was and what it caused in the empire.
Sounds
and
good.
And that's it.
Hey, we might be seeing each other soon. I think I'll be making a visit. I'm not 100% sure on timing. When I did the Trent Horn video reacting to Trent, he emailed me back after I emailed him initially. After I did the video, I sent him an email. He emailed me back. We are going to figure out some logistics, and I'll probably be making a trip to Texas to have a discussion, maybe a little debate, but hopefully it's more of a lucrative discussion and challenging of ideas in a friendly manner. And that will happen in Trent Horn's studio. And then meeting up with you, Jonathan, that will be probably the highlight of my trip in getting to hang out with you and your wife.
Oh, yeah, we got some good places to take you to eat, so you'll love it.
Sounds like a plan. I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, thank you, brother. Have a good one.
All right, thank you.
All right, everybody. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland. And I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth. Nothing more.